Greetings, road warriors. Tonight, our chronicle covers a stretch of asphalt that has haunted the dreams of long haulers for generations. A ribbon of a road in Tennessee where gravity isn't just a law of physics, but a formidable opponent waiting to punish the slightest mistake. We're heading for the infamous Monteagle. This isn't just a hill, it's a rite of passage, a jagged scar across the Cumberland Plateau that demands respect from every gearbox and brake drum that dares to traverse it. Let's be honest, trusting the light load paperwork from a broker you've never met is about as safe as buying sushi from a gas station vending machine. You do it because you have to, but you're sweating the consequences the whole time. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world our convoy is stretching tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The cab is warm, a cozy capsule of amber dashboard lights, and the rhythmic thrum of the diesel engine, which acts as a lullaby for the restless traveller. Tonight we're rolling westbound on Interstate 24, cutting through the humid heart of southern Tennessee. The air outside is thick, carrying the scent of damp pine and the distinct oily perfume of heavy industry that lingers in the valleys. Up ahead, the horizon stops acting like a flat line and begins to ripple, rising up into a dark, looming wall that blocks out the stars. This is the approach to Monteagle. To the average motorist in a sedan, catching up on a podcast or bickering about where to stop for dinner, this is just a scenic variation in the landscape, a bit of an incline that requires a slightly heavier foot on the gas pedal. But to the driver behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler, seeing that jagged silhouette against the moonlight triggers a primal physical reaction. The hands tighten on the steering wheel, gripping the leather at 10 and 2. The eyes scan the gauges, air pressure, oil temperature, coolant, looking for any sign of weakness. The breathing slows, the radio chatter dies down, or shifts from casual banter to curt warnings. Monteagle Mountain is not the highest peak in North America. It doesn't have the stratospheric elevation of the Rockies or the sheer, jagged cliffs of the Cascades. If you look at it purely by the numbers, it might seem underwhelming to someone who drives the Donner Pass or the Eisenhower Tunnel regularly. But numbers can be deceiving, and in the world of trucking, Monteagle is a name spoken with a specific cadence of reverence and dread. It sits between Nashville and Chattanooga, acting as a gatekeeper to the Cumberland Plateau. The reputation of this mountain isn't built on altitude, it is built on attitude. It is a steep, treacherous grind that has claimed more transmissions and brake linings than perhaps any other single stretch of highway in the south. The danger here lies in the deception. It lures you in with long, sweeping approaches before twisting the knife with grades that seem to defy the logic of highway engineering. As we begin the ascent, the engine's tone changes. The effortless hum of cruising speed deepens into a guttural growl as the turbocharger spools up, forcing compressed air into the cylinders to combat the rising resistance of gravity. You can feel the weight of the trailer, all 70-odd thousand pounds of it, suddenly anchoring itself to the back of the tractor. It's a sensation of drag, as if the road itself has turned to molasses. This is the moment where the machine has to prove its worth. There is a distinct mechanical sympathy required to get a heavy truck up a grade like this. You can't just mash the pedal to the floor. That's a rookie mistake that will overheat the engine before you're halfway to the summit. Instead, you have to coax it, finding that sweet spot in the RPM range where torque is maximized but heat generation is managed. It's a delicate dance of gears and throttle, played out at 25 miles per hour while the rest of the world zooms by in the left lane, oblivious to the struggle. There is a grim history embedded in the soil beneath these lanes. Long before the interstate smoothed out some of the rougher edges, this route was a notorious trap. The locals know the stories well. They know that when the fog rolls in, which it often does, thick as cotton wool and clinging to the windshield, the mountain disappears entirely. You're left driving by memory and the faint glow of the white line, hoping that the taillights ahead of you don't suddenly stop. The ascent is difficult, physically taxing on the equipment, but it is the anticipation of the other side that truly gnaws at the driver's mind. What goes up must come down, and on Monteagle, coming down is where the legends are born and where the ghosts are made. The sensory environment inside the truck shifts as we climb. The vibration of the drivetrain intensifies, shivering through the floorboards and up into the seat. It's a massage you didn't ask for and can't turn off. Outside, The trees crowd closer to the highway, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the headlight beams. The rock cuts reveal layers of limestone and shale, geological pages of history blasted open to make way for commerce. Every so often, you pass a sign indicating the grade percentage, 4%, 5%, approaching 6%. To a civilian, 4% sounds like a bank interest rate from the 90s. To a trucker, it is a mathematical warning that kinetic energy is about to become a very serious problem. Let's talk about that smell for a moment. If you have ever driven Monteagle on a hot summer night, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is a sharp, acrid scent that penetrates the cabin filters and sticks to the back of your throat. It smells like burning chemical resin and hot metal. It is the smell of brake fade. It happens when the brake shoes press against the drums with such prolonged intensity that the friction generates immense heat, temperatures soaring past 500 degrees Fahrenheit. At that heat, the chemical bonding agents in the brake lining begin to vaporize, creating a layer of gas between the pad and the drum. Once that gas layer forms, friction drops to near zero. You can stand on the brake pedal with both feet, pushing until your knees lock, but the truck won't slow down. It's known as glazing, and it turns the brakes into useless glass-smooth surfaces. The scent of someone else's failure often drifts through your vents before you even see their taillights. It's a ghostly olfactory warning. Someone ahead is in trouble. I recall speaking to an old-timer named Miller at a diner just outside of Manchester a few years back. Miller had skin like weathered leather and hands that looked like they'd been dipped in motor oil and permanently stained. He told me about his first run over Monteagle back in the late 70s, driving a cab over with a transmission that was notoriously finicky. "Son," he said, staring into his black coffee, "you don't drive Monteagle, you survive it." I remember coming over the crest and seeing the valley floor way down yonder looking like a toy set. My palms got so sweaty I thought the steering wheel was going to slip right out of my hands. I was so scared of smoking my brakes I went down that hill at 10 miles an hour. Cars were honking, people were waving one finger at me, but I didn't care. I made it to the bottom alive. He chuckled then, a dry rasping sound. Now the young bucks, they got their engine brakes and their automatic shifts and they think they're invincible. But the mountain is patient. It waits. Miller's sentiment is shared by many. There is a deep-seated respect for the topography here. It is one of the few places on the interstate system where the sheer power of the landscape forces you to pay attention. You can't be daydreaming about what you're going to have for dinner or rehearsing an argument with your dispatcher. The mountain demands presence. It demands that you listen to the pitch of the turbo, feel the lateral sway of the trailer in the curves, and watch the pyrometer needle like a hawk. Technically speaking, the section we're discussing is part of the Cumberland Plateau, a tableland that rises over 1,000 feet above the surrounding terrain. The sudden elevation change is what creates the challenge. In other parts of the country, elevation gains are spread out over dozens of miles. Here, it is condensed, aggressive, and rude. The geological abruptness of the plateau means that roads cannot gently meander up. They have to attack the slope. This geography also creates a unique microclimate. The plateau acts as a barrier to weather systems, often trapping moisture and creating sudden, dense fogs that can reduce visibility to zero in a matter of seconds. It's nature's way of adding a blindfold to a tightrope walk. As our truck chugs upward, the speedometer needle dips lower. We're in the crawling lane now, hazards flashing. A universal language of "I am slow, please don't hit me." Passing us on the left is a line of cars, their drivers looking annoyed at the delay. They don't understand that the beast we are driving is drinking fuel at a rate of 2 miles per gallon right now, generating enough heat to warm a small apartment complex. They see an obstacle. We feel a marathon. It's funny, really, how the scenic view signs always seem to appear at the exact moments when taking your eyes off the road would result in a fiery catastrophe. It's as if the highway department has a dark sense of humour, inviting you to admire the beautiful valley just as you're fighting to keep 20 tons of cargo from tipping over. The ascent is a sensory overload of noise and vibration, but it is merely the prologue. The real story, the one that keeps drivers up at night, is what happens after we crest the top. But for now, we are still climbing, the diesel engine singing its song of torque and tenacity. We pass the runaway truck ramps, great gravel scars on the hillside that look like sandy beaches from a distance. They are the emergency exits of the highway world, the last resort when all else fails. Every driver looks at them and thinks the same thing. I hope I never have to know what that feels like. They are quiet reminders that physics always wins eventually. The relationship between the trucker and this mountain is adversarial, yet intimate. You learn its curves, its bumps, the specific spot where the wind tends to gust from the west and push the trailer toward the shoulder. You learn where the shadows hide ice in the winter and where the asphalt gets slick with oil in the summer rain. It is a relationship forged in high-tension moments and sighs of relief. As we near the summit, the engine temperature gauge creeps slightly past the centre mark, a little wink from the machine saying it's working hard. We ease off the throttle just a hair, respecting the limits. We are almost to the plateau, almost to the flat stretch where we can catch our breath before the inevitable plunge. The Dixie Highway's graveyard is waiting, but tonight we are awake, we are aware, and we are rolling. To understand why a modern 18-wheeler struggles with the geography of Monteagle, we have to look back to a time when horsepower literally involved horses pulling automobiles out of the mud. We need to rewind the clock to the early 20th century, an era of dusters, goggles, and an audacious idea that paved the way for the very asphalt we drive on tonight. This is the story of the Dixie Highway, the grandfather of the Interstate system in the South, and the dream of a man named Carl Fisher. Fisher was not a trucker, nor was he a civil engineer. He was a showman, a visionary, and an entrepreneur with a flair for the dramatic. If you've ever watched the Indianapolis 500, you have Carl Fisher to thank. He built the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. After he successfully championed the Lincoln Highway, the first transcontinental road across America, Fisher turned his eyes south. It was 1914. The automobile was transitioning from a rich man's toy to a legitimate mode of transport, but the roads of America were woefully behind the times. South of the Mason-Dixon line, the road network was essentially a disconnected series of dirt farm paths that turned into impassable gumbo every time it rained. Fisher envisioned a paved ribbon connecting the industrial Midwest, Chicago and Detroit, to the sun-drenched paradise of Miami, Florida. He wanted to give the snowbirds a way to fly south without relying on the railroads. The inception of the Dixie Highway wasn't just about pouring concrete, it was a masterclass in political maneuvering. When Fisher announced the project, every governor from Michigan to Florida wanted a piece of the action. They knew that a major highway meant commerce, tourism, and money flowing into their dusty little towns. The lobbying was so intense, the arguments so heated, that the planners couldn't agree on a single route. Instead of one direct line, the Dixie Highway became a tangled loop, splitting into an eastern division and a western division to satisfy the competing egos of politicians in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Georgia. It was less of a highway and more of a wandering tour of the South, designed to pass through as many county seats as possible, and right there, smack in the middle of this grand design, stood the Cumberland Plateau. It was the formidable barrier that refused to be ignored. While the flatlands of Illinois and the sandy coasts of Florida offered easy digging, the mountains of Tennessee offered only resistance. The route Fisher's coalition chose didn't have the luxury of modern dynamite and massive earth movers in the quantities we have today. They had to follow the contours of the land, tracing old buffalo trails and Civil War supply lines. This meant the road over Monteagle wasn't engineered for efficiency, it was engineered for possibility. They took the path of least resistance, which, ironically, was still incredibly resistant. Imagine for a moment attempting this climb in a 1915 Ford Model T. You're not sitting in a climate-controlled cab with air-ride seats. You're perched on a thinly padded bench, exposed to the elements. Your engine produces a whopping 20 horsepower, about the same output as a modern lawnmower. As you approach the mountain, the road surface changes from gravel to rutted earth. There is no fuel injection to manage the altitude change. You have to manually adjust the spark advance lever on the steering column to keep the engine from stalling. And here is the kicker. The Model T relied on a gravity-fed fuel system. The gas tank was under the front seat, and the carburetor was up front near the engine. If the hill was too steep, gravity couldn't push the fuel forward to the engine. The solution? Drivers had to turn around and back their cars up the steepest grades of the Dixie Highway. Imagine the scene. A line of sputtering black jalopies, reversing up a winding mountain track, their drivers craning their necks to see through the dust, praying the transmission bands didn't snap. The tin can tourists, as they were affectionately called, were the pioneers of the road trip. They camped on the roadside, patching tyres every 50 miles and boiling water for tea over campfires. For them, Monteagle wasn't just a drive, it was an expedition. Reaching the summit was cause for celebration. There were no truck stops with showers and Wi-Fi. There were sparse general stores selling gasoline from hand-cranked pumps and water bags to cool overheating radiators. The descent was even more terrifying then than it is now. The brakes on early cars were rudimentary mechanical drums on the rear wheels only. If they got hot, they didn't just fade, they caught fire. It was common practice for drivers to drag a log behind the car, a literal drag, to create friction and slow the vehicle down on the steep grades. It was crude, it was destructive to the road, but it kept them from careening off the cliffs. One specific historical detail that often gets lost is the Good Roads movement meeting in Chattanooga in 1915, where the final route was solidified. The governors gathered, sipping bourbon and smoking cigars, drawing lines on maps that would dictate the flow of traffic for a century. They designated the route through Monteagle because it connected the key cities of Nashville and Chattanooga, creating a vital artery for the region. They knew it would be difficult to build, but they underestimated just how much the mountain would fight back. The construction crews, largely composed of convict labour and local mule teams, faced a geological nightmare. The limestone of the Cumberland Plateau is hard, layered rock. Breaking it required brute force. The early Dixie Highway wasn't paved in the modern sense. In many sections it was macadam, layers of crushed stone compressed by a heavy roller. It was better than dirt, but prone to washing out. In the winter, the freeze-thaw cycle would heave the stones, creating treacherous potholes that could snap a wooden wagon wheel or bend a steel axle. For the early trucking industry, which was just in its infancy, this road was a gauntlet. The trucks of the 1920s were solid tyre beasts with chain drives, vehicles that vibrated so violently that drivers often suffered from nerve damage in their hands. Taking a load of timber or coal over Monteagle in a solid tyre Mack truck was a physical beatdown that lasted hours. There's a human element to this era that resonates with us today. It's the spirit of the wildcatter, the independent operator. Back then, there were no logs, no hours of service mandates, no dot officers with portable scales. If you had a truck and the guts to drive it, you could haul freight. I read a diary entry once from a driver named Silas, who ran freight from Atlanta to Nashville in the late 20s. He described Monteagle at night as entering the mouth of a wolf. He wrote about the darkness being so absolute that the weak yellow beams of his headlights seemed to be swallowed up. He spoke of the camaraderie among the few drivers on the road, how they would stop at the bottom of the mountain to smoke and check their rigs, a ritual of shared anxiety before the climb. We didn't know if we'd make it up or if the brakes would hold on the way down, he wrote, but we went anyway because the freight had to move. That sentence, the freight had to move, is the unbroken thread connecting Silas in his rattling chain-drive truck to you, sitting in your aerodynamic cab tonight. The technology has changed, but the mandate remains the same. The routing of the Dixie Highway also shaped the communities along its path. Towns that had been isolated in the hollows suddenly found themselves on a national thoroughfare. Gas stations, diners and repair shops sprang up like mushrooms after a rain. The roadside attraction was born here. Enterprising locals realised that these weary travellers needed a reason to stop and spend a nickel. They painted signs on barns, built lookout towers, and sold homemade pecan logs. The economy of the region shifted from purely agrarian to service-oriented, all because Carl Fisher drew a line on a map and said, "Build it here." But as traffic increased, so did the carnage. The narrow, winding path that was suitable for a Model T at 20 miles per hour was deadly for the heavier, faster cars and trucks of the 1930s and 40s. The graveyard reputation began to take hold. Newspapers from the era are filled with grim headlines of buses losing control and trucks overturning on the hairpin curves. The road was a victim of its own success. It brought the world to the mountain, but the mountain wasn't ready to host them safely. It is fascinating to look at the old maps and see how the road twisted and turned, fighting for every inch of elevation. Today, I-24 blasts through rock cuts that are hundreds of feet deep, imposing a straight line on a crooked world. But the old Dixie Highway had to negotiate with the terrain. It followed the creek beds until they got too steep, then switchbacked up the ridges. It was a more organic, intimate way to travel, but it was inefficient and dangerous. The ghosts of those early travellers are still there, in the overgrown roadbeds that you can sometimes glimpse through the trees if you look quickly enough while passing mile marker 134. Carl Fisher died in 1939, having lost most of his fortune in the Florida real estate crash and the Great Depression. He never saw the interstate system that would eventually supersede his beloved highway. But every time you see a Dixie Highway street sign in a small town in Kentucky or Georgia, you are seeing a remnant of his dream. He was the man who looked at a mud pit and saw a vacation. He looked at Monteagle and saw a challenge that could be overcome, not with tunnels, but with sheer stubbornness. As we roll past the modern exit signs, comfortably seated in our air-conditioned cabs, it's worth tipping a cap to those who cleared the path. They did it with dynamite, mules, and a level of optimism that bordered on insanity. They built the skeleton of the road network we flesh out every day. The mountain was wilder then, untamed and raw. The trees were thicker, the nights darker, and the silence of the plateau was broken only by the backfire of an engine struggling against the grade. Fisher's dream was to connect the north and the south, but in doing so he created a legendary battleground between man and mountain, a battle that we are still fighting, in our own way, every time we shift down and prepare for the climb. The dream of a highway is a clean geometric thing, a line drawn on a map with a straight edge, bypassing obstacles with the stroke of a pen. The reality of building that highway, however, is a chaotic, filthy and deafening war against the earth itself. When the dignitaries and politicians finished their toasts and rolled up their maps, the silence of the Cumberland Plateau was shattered, not by the hum of the engines, but by the frantic rhythm of sledgehammers and the terrified braying of mules. To understand the terror of Monteagle, you have to understand what lies beneath the asphalt. We aren't driving over a pile of dirt. We're driving over a geological fortress that fought the steam shovel and the pickaxe for every single inch. The geology of the Cumberland Plateau is stubborn. It is topped with a layer of erosion-resistant sandstone, often referred to as caprock. Beneath that lies softer limestone and shale. This combination creates the plateau's signature sheer cliffs and deep, jagged gorges. When the early road crews arrived in the late 1910s and early 1920s, they weren't just clearing brush. They were attempting to carve a shelf into the side of a stone face that had stood unchanged for millions of years. There were no laser-guided surveyors or satellite topography maps. There was a man with a transit level, a notebook, and a hunch. The workforce that descended on the mountain was a motley collection of humanity. In Tennessee, as in much of the South during this era, the state relied heavily on convict labour. It was a brutal system, often called the chain gang, though the reality was less cinematic and more industrialised. Men in striped trousers, their ankles sometimes shackled, were leased out to the road commissions. They were joined by local labourers, hard-bitten mountain men who knew the terrain, and wandering immigrants looking for a wage. They lived in temporary tent cities that sprang up along the proposed route, camps that smelled of unwashed bodies, wood smoke, and boiling cabbage. These camps were rowdy, dangerous places where a game of dice could end in a knife fight, but come sunrise, every man was united by a common enemy: the rock. The primary tool of the trade wasn't the bulldozer, which was still a primitive and rare beast, but the mule, specifically the Missouri mule, big, strong, and possessed of a wicked intelligence. You'll hear old-timers speak of mules with more respect than they accord to most people. A horse will work itself to death. It will pull until its heart bursts if you ask it to. A mule knows its limits. If you overloaded a drag pan or a wagon, the mule would simply stop. It would plant its hooves, lay its ears back, and refuse to move until some of the weight was removed. They were the Union safety reps of the 1920s. The skinners, the men who drove the mule teams, developed a language of clicks, whistles, and creative profanity to maneuver these animals along the precipice. Imagine a team of 4 mules dragging a slip scraper, a heavy metal scoop used to move earth. They're working on a ledge barely 10 feet wide. To the left is a wall of sandstone. To the right, a 300-foot drop into the tree canopy below. One wrong step by a led mule, one spook caused by a falling rock, and the whole team, the scraper, and the driver would tumble into the abyss. It happened. The mountain has swallowed more than just trucks. It has swallowed the very creatures that tried to tame it. But mules couldn't move solid rock. For that they needed the powder monkeys. In the hierarchy of dangerous jobs, the man handling the explosives was king. In the early days of the Dixie Highway construction, black powder was common, but dynamite was the heavy lifter. The technique was terrifyingly manual. First, a team of steel drivers would drill holes into the rock face. One man held a steel chisel, the jumper, and another man swung a 10-pound hammer. Clink, turn, clink, turn, hour after hour. If the hammerman missed, the holder lost a hand. Once the holes were deep enough, the powder monkey would pack them with sticks of dynamite, insert a blasting cap and a length of fuse, and yell, "Fire in the hole!" There is a technical nuance to blasting that is often overlooked. You don't just blow things up. You have to fracture the rock in a way that makes it movable. If you use too much powder, you send boulders flying into the next county, potentially killing your own crew or crushing the supply wagons. If you use too little, the rock just cracks and sits there, mocking you. The experienced blasters could read the grain of the sandstone. They knew exactly how much soup, nitroglycerin, to use to shear off a slab so it would slide predictably onto the roadbed, where it could be broken down by sledgehammers. It was an art form practiced by men who often ended their careers with fewer fingers than they started with. I recall reading an account from a foreman's logbook dated October 1921. He detailed a week of rain that had turned the worksite into a slurry of red clay and despair. The mules were sinking up to their hocks. The dynamite was sweating. When nitroglycerin separates from the stabilizer in old dynamite, it forms unstable beads of liquid on the surface that can detonate with the slightest jar. The crew had to move a crate of this sweating dynamite from a flooded storage tent. The foreman described the scene: 2 men carrying the wooden crate as if it were the crown jewels, walking in synchronized steps through the mud, while 50 other men stood 100 yards away holding their breath. They made it, but the tension of that 10-minute walk was enough to break a man's nerve. That is the foundation of the road we drive. It wasn't poured, it was gambled for. The engineering challenge was balancing the cut and the fill. You blast a cut through a hill, and you use that debris to fill the adjacent hollow. It sounds simple, but on the steep slopes of Monteagle, the fill had a nasty habit of sliding down the mountain. They built retaining walls out of dry stacked stone, fitted together like a jigsaw puzzle without mortar. Some of these walls are still out there, hidden beneath the overgrowth of kudzu, holding up the earth silently for a century. They represent a craftsmanship that we have largely lost, a patience that modern deadlines don't allow. As the road slowly inched its way up the escarpment, the locals watched with a mix of suspicion and opportunity. The mountain people of the Cumberland Plateau were isolated, self-reliant, and wary of outsiders, but they also saw the practical benefits. A road meant they could get their timber to the railhead in days rather than weeks. It meant a doctor could reach them in an emergency. There was a symbiotic, albeit tense, relationship between the construction camps and the mountain families. Local farmers would sell corn, hogs, and moonshine to the camps. Ah, yes, the moonshine. The white lightning of the Cumberlands fueled the construction just as much as the cornbread. It was the anaesthetic for the aching muscles and the eraser of the day's near-death experiences. One of the most grueling sections to build was the horseshoe curve, a tight switchback designed to gain elevation quickly. To build it, they had to blast out a massive amphitheatre in the hillside. The debris from the blast was so substantial that it changed the flow of a small mountain stream. Today, when you drive the modern Interstate, you are soaring over these struggles on massive concrete pillars, but the old road, US 41, still hugs the contours that these men carved. If you take the exit and drive the old route, you can feel the intimacy of the labour. The road feels hand-sculpted. It dips and weaves, reacting to every protrusion of rock. You can see the drill marks in the cliff face, the vertical scars left by the steel jumpers. The culmination of this effort was a narrow 2-lane ribbon of macadam, crushed stone bound with tar. It was a far cry from the smooth concrete of today. It was rough, dark, and slippery when wet. But when it opened, it was hailed as a miracle. Cars could finally conquer the plateau without reversing. The barrier had been breached. However, the victory was bittersweet for the labourers. The completion of the road meant the end of the job. The camps were struck, the tents folded, and the mules loaded onto trains. The convicts went back to the penitentiary or were moved to the next impossible project. They left behind a scar on the mountain that would eventually become a scar on the psyche of every trucker in America. It is strange to think that the quiet terror we feel descending Monteagle today is the great-grandchild of the loud, violent terror of its construction. The energy of the place has shifted, but the intensity remains. Back then, the danger was the rock falling on you. Now, the danger is you falling off the rock. The physics haven't changed, only the vectors. We also have to acknowledge the environmental cost, which was an afterthought in the 1920s. The blasting destabilized slopes, leading to landslides that plagued the road for decades. The runoff from the exposed shale turned creeks acidic. The mountain didn't take these insults lying down. It fought back with erosion, washing out the roadbed every spring, forcing the crews to return and patch their work. It was a constant war of attrition. The engineers would build a wall, the mountain would push it over, they would pave a section, the frost would heave it up. It was as if the plateau resented the intrusion, shaking the fleas off its back. There's a legend, likely apocryphal but widely repeated in the truck stops, about a mule named Old Red. Supposedly, Red was the smartest mule on the mountain. One day, during a particularly heavy blast, a boulder pinned Red's driver against the canyon wall. The story goes that while the other men ran for cover, Red stood his ground and allowed the men to use his harness to leverage the rock off the driver, saving his life. Whether it's true or not doesn't really matter. It speaks to the bond that formed in that chaos. When you're fighting a mountain, your team is your family, whether they have 2 legs or 4. So, as we glide comfortably up the grade, let's remember the sweat soaked into the soil beneath us. Let's remember the clink-clank of the hammers that echoed through these hollows 100 years ago. We are riding on the shoulders of men who broke their back so we could break the speed limit, or at least try to maintain it. The dynamite has long since faded and the mules are dust, but the cut they made remains, a permanent testament to the stubbornness of the human animal. We conquered the rock, but as we'll see, the rock was just biding its time, waiting for the machines to get faster, heavier, and more complacent. With the road conquered and the dynamite smoke cleared, the Dixie Highway transformed from a construction site into something far more vibrant and chaotic. It became the main street of the South. If the 1920s were about the gritty struggle to build the road, the decades that followed, the 30s, 40s, and 50s, were about selling the experience of driving it. This was the golden age of the great American road trip, a time when the journey was just as important and often just as cluttered as the destination. Imagine the view from the cab of a truck in 1950. You aren't just watching the white line, you're navigating a gauntlet of capitalism. The dense forests of the Cumberland Plateau didn't just have trees anymore, they had billboards. Every curve, every straightaway, and every barn roof screamed for your attention. And the loudest scream of all, painted in stark black and white, was a command that became a cultural icon: Sea Rock City. We have to pause and appreciate the sheer audacity of this marketing campaign. It was the precursor to the internet pop-up ad, but painted on the side of a farmer's livelihood. Garnet Carter, the man behind the Rock City attraction on nearby Lookout Mountain, was a genius. He hired a sign painter named Clark Byers to travel up and down the Dixie Highway, offering farmers a simple deal. I will paint your barn for free, as long as I can paint my slogan on the roof. In the Depression-era South, a fresh coat of paint was a luxury few could afford, so the farmers agreed in droves. Byers painted over 900 barns across 19 states, but the concentration was highest right here, leading up to and over Monteagle. For the truck driver hauling textiles or produce, these barns were more than just advertisements, they were mile markers. You knew you were getting close to the summit when the frequency of the signs increased. It created a strange, rhythmic visual language. Sea Rock City, Ruby Falls, Stuckey's, Pecan Logs. The landscape was shouting at you, and it wasn't just barns. The roadside was littered with tourist courts, the ancestors of the modern motel. These weren't the sterile, multi-story chains we have today. They were collections of tiny individual cabins arranged in a semicircle, often with names like the Sleep Tight or the Rest a While. They promised steam heat and private baths, luxuries that were plastered in neon lights that buzzed and flickered in the humid Tennessee night. Navigating a heavy truck through this carnival was a lesson in patience. The old US 41 over Monteagle was narrow, terrifyingly so by modern standards. There were no shoulders, just a ragged edge of asphalt that dropped off into a ditch or a ravine. And the traffic. In the summer, the road was clogged with station wagons overloaded with luggage tied to the roof, radiators steaming, and children hanging out of the windows. The professional driver had to share his workspace with the amateur vacationer. You would be grinding up the grade in a low gear, your engine roaring, only to be cut off by a family from Ohio, who decided to pull over suddenly to buy a bag of boiled peanuts or a chenille bedspread. Speaking of bedspreads, that is a texture of history you can't ignore. As you came down off the plateau and headed into Georgia, the road became Peacock Alley. The local textile industry found a way to sell directly to the tourists by hanging tufted chenille bedspreads on clotheslines right next to the highway. Miles of them. Peacocks, flowers, geometric patterns, fluttering in the slipstream of passing trucks. It was a tunnel of fabric. For a trucker, it was a colourful hazard. A strong gust of wind could blow a bedspread right onto your windshield, blinding you instantly. It sounds funny now. Death by bedding. But at 40 miles per hour on a 2-lane road, it was a genuine concern. Technically, the vehicles of this era added to the chaos. We're talking about the age of the bias-ply tyre. Unlike the radial tyres we use today, which have stiff sidewalls and maintain a flat contact patch, bias-ply tyres were rounded and flexible. They had a tendency to wander on the road, following the grooves and ruts in the asphalt. Driving a truck on bias-ply tyres over Monteagle required constant steering corrections. You were never just holding the wheel straight. You were soaring at it, fighting the tyre's desire to dance. And when they got hot, which they always did on the descent, they would sing, a high-pitched harmonic whine that rose in pitch as you picked up speed. That sound, combined with the smell of hot rubber, is the soundtrack of mid-century trucking. The neon nights of Monteagle were something to behold. Because the climb was so arduous and the descent so treacherous, a micro-economy of service stations and diners sprang up at the summit. It was a staging ground. Trucks would pull over to let their brakes cool or to check their loads. The diners were glowing beacons of grease and coffee. The Monteagle Diner, and places like it, were the social hubs. Inside, under the haze of cigarette smoke, you'd find a segregation of sorts, not by law, but by profession. The tourists sat in the booths, eating burgers and looking at maps. The truckers sat at the counter, nursing black coffee and talking about the road conditions. Cop sitting at the bottom of the grade, one would murmur. Ice patch on the shady side of the horseshoe, another would reply. This was the analog ways. The intelligence network of the road was built on face-to-face conversation. If you wanted to survive the night, you listened to the guys at the counter. They knew which curves had been repaved and which ones were slick with oil. They knew which local sheriff was looking to meet his ticket quota. There is a human story that perfectly captures the clash of these two worlds, tourism and trucking. I once heard a tale about a driver named Big Ed, who drove a bubbly-nosed Mac B model in the 50s. Ed was hauling a load of cast-iron pipes, a heavy, unforgiving cargo. He was coming down the mountain, keeping it slow, when he got stuck behind a tourist in a shiny new Cadillac. The Cadillac driver was terrified of the descent, riding his brakes all the way down, doing maybe 15 miles per hour. Ed's truck was heavy. He needed momentum to make the next little rise, but he also couldn't ride his brakes too hard or he'd lose them. He was trapped. He blew his air horn, a deep, mournful blast, but the Cadillac just went slower. Finally, at a wide spot, the Cadillac pulled over and the driver jumped out, shaking his fist. Ed rolled by, leaned out of his cab and shouted, "Buddy, if I could stop this thing, I'd get out and help you drive." It was a joke, but it wasn't. The fear of momentum was real. The architecture of the road itself in this era deserves a mention. The curves were often banked incorrectly, or off camber. In a modern highway, a curve is banked so that gravity helps pull you into the turn. On the old Dixie Highway, some curves were flat or even sloped away from the turn, trying to throw you off the mountain. This was due to the limitations of the early grading equipment and the drainage requirements. Navigating an off-camber turn in a top-heavy truck is a sensation of impending doom. You can feel the trailer trying to lift its inside wheels, teasing the centre of gravity. It required a slow-in, fast-out technique that every veteran driver mastered. You crawled into the curve, settled the weight, and then powered out. But despite the danger, there was a romance to it. The motor court era was personal. When you stopped for the night, you parked right in front of your cabin. You could see your truck from your bed. There was a sense of ownership and closeness to the machine. Today we park in massive lots, hundreds of yards from the building, lost in a sea of identical trailers. Back then, you and your truck were a team sleeping side by side. The signs along the road also served as a barometer for the truck's health. The radiator water signs were ubiquitous. Cars and trucks of that era were prone to overheating on the climb. Service stations sold canvas water bags that you would hang on the front bumper. The idea was that the airflow would evaporate the water seeping through the canvas, cooling the remaining water inside, which you could then pour into your radiator. Seeing a car on the side of the road, hood up, steam billowing like a geyser, was as common as seeing a squirrel. It was part of the ritual of Monteagle. If you didn't boil over, you bragged about it. As we moved into the late 50s, however, the charm began to wear thin. The volume of traffic was strangling the economy. The Sea Rock City barns were quaint, but they couldn't compensate for the fact that it took 3 hours to go 40 miles. The romantic winding road was becoming a bottleneck. The trucks were getting bigger, the 40-foot trailers were replacing the 20-footers, and they simply didn't fit on the old asphalt. There were instances where 2 trucks meeting on a sharp curve would have to come to a complete stop and inch past each other, mirrors scraping while traffic backed up for miles in both directions. The neon signs began to flicker out, or rather, they began to look a little desperate. The writing was on the wall, and the writing said, Interstate Highway Act of 1956. The government under Eisenhower had decided that the country needed speed, efficiency, and safety. They were going to replace the wandering, scenic routes with concrete superhighways. They were going to blast through the mountains instead of going over them. But before the concrete poured, there was a twilight period where the old road was at its absolute peak of insanity. It was a mix of 1957 Chevys with tail fins, straining Macs and Peterbilts, families eating picnic lunches on the tailgate, and the ever-present smell of burning brakes. It was a community on the move. You couldn't be anonymous on the old Dixie Highway. You looked the other drivers in the eye. You saw the kids in the back seat. You saw the sweat on the brow of the fellow trucker. It was a shared struggle, a collective holding of breath as everyone tried to get over the hump and down to the valley floor. The transition was coming. The painted barns would soon be bypassed and left to fade in the sun, their messages reading Sea Rock Sea as the vines took over. The motor courts would turn into cheap monthly rentals or fall into ruin. But for a few decades, Monteagle wasn't just a barrier. It was a destination. It was a neon-lit, brake-smoking carnival that tested your nerve and sold you a pecan log as a reward for surviving. And even today, if you drive the back roads, you can sometimes catch a glimpse of that old paint, a ghost of a time when the road was slower, harder, and infinitely more colourful. If the Dixie Highway was a hand-stitched quilt, colourful, patterned, and made with a personal touch, then Interstate 24 is a sheet of industrial-grade steel. It is cold, efficient, and designed for one purpose: velocity. As the 1950s bled into the 1960s, the romance of the winding mountain road began to lose its luster against the shiny promise of the Eisenhower era. The nation was no longer interested in stopping to see the world's largest ball of twine. It wanted to get from St. Louis to Atlanta before the sun went down. The Sea Rock City barns were about to be eclipsed by green reflective signs and exit numbers. The catalyst for this transformation was, of course, the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. President Eisenhower, inspired by the efficient autobahns he had seen in Germany during the war, envisioned a network of superhighways that would connect the continent. The official justification was national defense, the ability to move military convoys and evacuate cities in the event of a nuclear strike. But for the truckers of the Cumberland Plateau, it wasn't about missiles, it was about money. A road that allowed you to maintain 50 miles per hour uphill was a road that put more bread on the table. The construction of I-24 over Monteagle was a project of pharaonic proportions. It wasn't just an upgrade, it was a terraforming event. The engineers didn't want to negotiate with the mountain anymore, they wanted to dominate it. They brought in machines that made the old steam shovels look like children's toys, massive scrapers, bulldozers the size of houses, and drill rigs that could bore into the limestone with terrifying speed descended on the plateau. The engineering philosophy had shifted entirely. On the old road, the path followed the topography. If there was a hill, you went over it. If there was a valley, you dipped into it. The interstate demanded a design speed. To achieve a road where vehicles could safely travel at 70 miles per hour, the grades had to be consistent, and the curves had to be gentle sweeps with substantial banking. This meant the earth-moving requirements were astronomical. They didn't just scratch the surface, they performed open-heart surgery on the landscape. One of the most significant technical achievements and challenges was the cut. To flatten out the ascent, the engineers had to blast a channel directly through the caprock of the plateau. We are talking about millions of cubic yards of rock. The geology here is tricky. The layers of sandstone and shale are not always stable when exposed to the air and rain. The pre-splitting technique became crucial. This involved drilling a line of closely spaced holes along the intended excavation line and detonating them lightly before the main blast. This created a fracture plane, leaving a relatively smooth rock face that required less maintenance. If you look at the rock walls on I-24 today, those vertical drill marks are the signatures of this technique. They are the scars of a precise explosive surgery. But pouring concrete over a mountain is not just about geology, it's about displacement. The new right-of-way was massive, a swath of land 300 feet wide that sliced through family farms, old hunting grounds, and established communities. The concept of eminent domain became a dirty phrase in the local diners. People who had lived in the same hollows for generations, whose front porches looked out over the valley, were told that their view was now essential infrastructure. I remember a story from a retired surveyor named Hutch, a man who spent his life peering through a theodolite. He told me about staking out the path for the interstate near the top of the mountain. He walked onto a property where an old woman was sitting on her porch shelling peas. She watched him drive a wooden stake into the middle of her flower garden. She didn't yell, Hutch said, shaking his head. She just asked if the road was going to be loud. I lied to her. I told her the trees would block the sound, but I knew we were building a river of noise that would never stop. That is the human cost of efficiency. The interstate severed the intimate connection between the traveller and the land. You no longer drove through a community, you drove over it, separated by chain-link fences and sound barriers. The paving process itself was a marvel of modern industrialism. They used slip-form pavers, machines that extruded concrete like toothpaste from a tube. These behemoths would crawl along the prepared roadbed, leaving behind a perfectly formed slab of concrete, complete with reinforcement bars in a single pass. It was a factory process brought to the outdoors. The result was a surface so smooth that it felt like floating compared to the rattling macadam of the old highway. However, the smoothness was deceptive. The engineers could flatten the grade, but they couldn't eliminate gravity. The descent on the new I-24 was still steep, holding steady at grades of 4 to 6% for miles. On the old road, the curves forced you to slow down. You physically couldn't take a hairpin turn at 60 miles per hour. But the interstate was wide and open. The long, sweeping curves invited speed. It created a psychological trap for drivers. You felt safe. The road was 3 lanes wide. The visibility was perfect. You could see for a mile. And so, drivers, especially inexperienced ones, would let the truck roll. Let it run, they'd think. I'll catch it at the bottom. But you don't catch a loaded truck on a 6% grade once it passes a certain velocity. You just become a passenger in a very expensive missile. The design speed of the highway clashed with the terminal velocity of a runaway truck. The concrete was unforgiving. It offered no friction, no resistance. The opening of the interstate changed the culture of trucking on the mountain. The social stops vanished. You didn't need to stop to cool your radiator anymore because the grade was consistent enough that modern cooling systems could cope. You didn't stop for a burger because you were on a schedule that was now measured in minutes, not hours. The CB radio began to replace the diner counter as the primary mode of communication. Drivers would chatter to each other as they flew past the exits. Exit 134, exit 135, names like Monteagle and Sewanee becoming just green blurs rather than places with faces. There was a specific technical evolution in the road surface that happened here too. The concrete was grooved. If you look closely at the highway, or if you ride a motorcycle, you feel it. Tiny grooves cut across the direction of travel. This was done to prevent hydroplaning. The Cumberland Plateau gets heavy rainfall, sudden tropical deluges that turn the road into a river. On smooth concrete, a tyre can ride up on a wedge of water, losing all contact with the road. The grooves channel the water away, allowing the rubber to bite the pavement. It's a subtle detail, but one that has saved thousands of lives. It makes a distinctive hum as you drive over it, a frequency that sings in harmony with your tyres. The interstate also introduced the Jersey barrier to the mountain. Before, if you crossed the centre line, you hit oncoming traffic. Now, a massive wall of concrete separated the eastbound and westbound lanes. This eliminated head-on collisions, which were the scourge of the old 2-lane roads. But it also created a chute. If you were in trouble, you had nowhere to go. You were boxed in between a concrete wall on the left and a guardrail on the right. The margin of error had become a physical corridor. I spoke to a driver named Saul who made the transition. He drove the old US 41 in a B-model Mac and then switched to a cab over Kenworth when I-24 opened. The first time I took the big road, Saul said, I felt like I was cheating. I went up the mountain in 5th gear instead of 2nd. I thought, this is it, the beast is dead. But then I saw a guy in a brand new Peterbilt lay it over on the first big curve going down. He hit that concrete barrier and sparked like a Roman candle. That's when I knew. The road is better, but the mountain is still the boss. The transition also meant the death of the local economy that depended on the slow traffic. The gas stations with the hand-cranked pumps, the little diners with the clean restroom signs, they withered and died. The traffic was zooming by 50 feet above their roofs. The town of Monteagle had to reinvent itself. It became a truck stop hub, hosting massive travel centres at the exits, rather than a string of mom-and-pop shops. The intimacy was traded for volume. One curious byproduct of the interstate construction was the fill. The millions of tons of rock blasted from the cuts had to go somewhere. They were used to fill the deep ravines to create a level roadbed. Some of these fills are hundreds of feet deep. You're literally driving on top of a man-made mountain that sits on top of a real mountain. The settling of this fill over the decades has created the whoops and dips that you sometimes feel on the highway. It's the earth slowly compressing under the weight of 50 years of commerce. So the concrete ribbon was laid, the ribbons were cut, the politicians gave their speeches about progress and connectivity, and the first convoys rolled. They rolled faster, heavier, and with a sense of invincibility that was dangerous. The old ghosts of the Dixie Highway, the mules, the convicts, the tin can tourists, were buried under layers of subbase and aggregate. But the physics remained. The friction coefficients, the thermal limits of brake drums, the centre of gravity, none of that changed because the road got wider. In fact, the new road just allowed us to test those limits at higher speeds. We paved over the history, but we didn't erase the danger. We just streamlined it. We made it possible to make a mistake at 70 miles per hour instead of 30. And as we will see, that difference in speed changes everything. It changes the sound of the crash, the spread of the debris, and the way a driver prays when the pedal goes soft. We have reached the apex. The engine, which has been screaming in protest for the last few miles, suddenly grows quiet. The turbo boost gauge drops to 0. The laboured growl of the diesel is replaced by the whistling of wind around the mirrors and the rhythmic thump-thump of tyres on concrete joints. This is the moment of suspension, the split second between the climb and the fall. We are at the top of Monteagle, and while the view might be spectacular, no driver in their right mind is looking at the scenery. They are looking at a yellow diamond-shaped sign that bears a simple, terrifying graphic, a truck on a triangle pointing down. Beneath it, the numbers that dictate your fate. Grade 6%, next 4 miles. To the uninitiated, 6% sounds like a rounding error. It sounds like a decent return on a savings account or a mediocre tip at a diner. But in the world of heavy haulage, 6% is not a number, it is a threat. It means that for every 100 feet you travel forward, the road drops 6 feet vertically. That might not seem steep if you're walking, but when you wrap that geometry around a vehicle weighing 80,000 pounds, you're no longer dealing with simple transport. You're dealing with a physics experiment gone wrong. Let's break down the science of the descent, because understanding the math is the only way to understand the fear. When a truck sits at the top of Monteagle, it possesses an immense amount of potential energy. It's like a boulder balanced on a ledge. The moment you tip over the crest, that potential energy begins to convert into kinetic energy, the energy of motion. Gravity, that relentless invisible hand, grabs the trailer by the bumper and pulls. It wants to accelerate the truck. It wants to turn that 80,000 pounds into a missile. On a flat road, if you take your foot off the gas, wind resistance and rolling resistance will eventually bring you to a stop. On a 6% grade, those forces are laughable. Gravity is far stronger. Without intervention, a loaded truck rolling down a 6% grade will accelerate from 50 to 80 miles per hour in a matter of seconds. And here is where the terror sets in. Kinetic energy increases with the square of the speed. A truck moving at 70 miles per hour has nearly twice the energy of a truck moving at 50. That means the brakes have to do twice as much work to stop it. It is a compounding debt of energy that you simply cannot pay off if you let the speed build up. Now, let's talk about the equipment we use to fight this war, the drum brake. Despite all our modern technology, GPS, collision mitigation systems, satellite radio, the primary mechanism stopping most trucks on the road today is a piece of technology that hasn't changed fundamentally since the 1940s. It consists of a cast iron drum that rotates with the wheel and a pair of curved shoes lined with friction material. When you press the brake pedal, compressed air forces the shoes outward against the inside of the spinning drum. Friction creates drag, and drag slows the truck. But friction also creates heat. Immense, radiating, metal warping heat. Imagine holding a lit match. Now imagine holding a blowtorch. That is the difference between stopping at a traffic light and braking down Monteagle. As the shoes drag against the drums, the temperature spikes. We're talking about temperatures reaching 600, 700, even 800 degrees Fahrenheit. At these temperatures, physics starts to get weird, and the mechanical demons come out to play. The first demon is mechanical fade, also known as drum expansion. It's a simple property of metallurgy. When metal gets hot, it expands. As the cast iron brake drum heats up, it grows larger in diameter. It physically moves away from the brake shoes. This means the S-cam, the little metal fist that twists to push the shoes out, has to rotate further to make contact. The brake pedal in the cab has to travel further toward the floor. Eventually the system runs out of stroke. The shoes are pushed out as far as they can go, but the drum has expanded beyond their reach. You push the pedal, and it hits the floorboard with a hollow thunk, but the truck keeps rolling. That creates a specific kind of panic, a spongy helplessness that makes your stomach drop through your boots. The second demon is gas fade. The brake linings are made of a complex stew of materials, resins, binding agents, metal shavings. When these materials hit that critical temperature threshold, the resins begin to boil and vaporize. They release a gas. This gas gets trapped between the shoe and the drum, creating a microscopic high-pressure air hockey table. The shoes are no longer touching the metal. They are floating on a layer of superheated gas. The friction drops to near zero. This is often called glazing, because the heat polishes the lining until it looks like glass. When this happens, the pedal feels hard, like kicking a brick wall, but the speedometer just keeps climbing. I recall a conversation with a veteran driver named Pops, somewhere near the Tennessee-Georgia line. Pops was a man who didn't say much, but when he spoke about brakes, you listened. He described the smell of brake fade not just as a scent, but as a taste. It tastes like copper pennies and burning hair, he said, tapping a cigarette on the table. You smell it before you feel it. It creeps into the cab, and once you smell it, it's usually too late to be gentle. You've already cooked them. Pops told me about a run in the mid-80s, hauling steel coils, suicide coils, they call them, because if they break loose, they roll right over the cab. He was coming down Monteagle in a rainstorm. He misjudged the weight of his load. He started down in 7th gear when he should have been in 5th. By the time I hit the first curve, he said, I was doing 60. I touched the brakes, and I saw steam. Not smoke, steam. The water on the drums was flashing off instantly. I knew if I held the pedal down, I'd lose them completely, so I had to snub brake. Hit them hard for 3 seconds to drop 5 miles an hour, then let them cool for 10 seconds, praying the whole time that the 10 seconds was enough. He made it, obviously, but he said his legs were shaking so bad when he got to the bottom, he couldn't walk for an hour. That technique Pops mentioned, snub braking, is a critical skill. The old adage used to be light steady pressure. We know now that is wrong. Light pressure just generates constant heat without giving the drums a chance to dissipate it. It's a slow death for the system. Snub braking is aggressive. You stab the brakes to scrub off speed quickly, converting a chunk of energy into heat, and then you get off the pedal completely to let the airflow cool the drums. It's a rhythm. Brake, release, brake, release. It's like doing CPR on the truck's velocity. The sensory experience of a truck with smoking brakes is unforgettable. If you're following one, you see wisps of blue-grey smoke curling out from the wheel wells. At night it can look like the wheels are on fire. Sometimes they actually are on fire. A wheel seal can fail, leaking grease onto the glowing red drum. Whoosh! Now you have a rolling bonfire. There is a specific grim camaraderie on the radio when this happens. Hey swift driver, you got smoke on your drives, a voice will crackle. It's a polite way of saying, you are about to have a catastrophic failure. Historically, the danger of these grades forced the industry to standardise the percent grade signage. Before the 1970s, signs were often vague: steep hill or trucks use low gear. But steep is subjective. Is it steep for a Chevy Nova or steep for a loaded Kenworth? The Federal Highway Administration began pushing for the specific percentage signs to give drivers the math they needed to make a decision. That 6% on the sign allows a driver to consult their mental or literal chart. Okay, 80,000 pounds, 6% grade. I need to be in 5th gear and hold 25 km. It turned a guessing game into a calculation, but calculations fail when the human element enters. The biggest enemy on the descent isn't the drum or the grade, it's the ego. It's the Billy Big Rigger mentality. You see a driver in the left lane empty, hammering down the hill. You think, I can keep up. Or maybe you're late for a delivery appointment in Chattanooga, and you think, I can fudge it a little, I'll go down at 50 instead of 30. That 20-mile-per-hour difference is the difference between a controlled descent and a runaway. The mountain doesn't care about your logbook, it doesn't care about your delivery window, it only cares about FDASDA, Gasmodello. There is also the phenomenon of the false flat. Monteagle has sections on the descent that look like they are levelling out. The trees pull back, the horizon opens up and your brain says, the worst is over. You relax, you let off the brakes, you upshift. And then, wham, the road drops away again, steeper than before. But now you're in a higher gear, moving faster, and you have lost the mechanical advantage of the engine. Downshifting on a steep grade is a manoeuvre fraught with peril. If you miss the gear, if you get stuck in neutral while the truck accelerates, you're done. You can't get it back in gear because the road speed and engine speed are too far apart. You are freewheeling. This is the trucker's nightmare. A silent engine, a screaming drive shaft, and a speedometer needle winding clockwise like a clock in a time-lapse. The sounds of the descent are different from the ascent. The ascent is loud, guttural, explosive. The descent is characterized by a high-pitched whine. It's the sound of the tyres singing under load, the turbo whistling as the engine acts as an air compressor, if you have jakes, which we will get to later, and the wind tearing at the mirrors. But beneath it all is the sound of anxiety. It's the sound of silence inside the cab. No music, no podcasts, just the driver listening to the machine, waiting for a vibration or a smell that signals betrayal. We pass a brake check area sign. In some states, these are mandatory stops. You pull over, get out, walk around the truck. You put your hand near, but never on, the hubs to feel the heat. You look for cracked drums. You adjust the slack adjusters if you're driving an older rig. It's a ritual of respect. It's like checking your parachute before jumping out of a plane. But on I-24, most drivers just roll through, trusting their maintenance and their skill. It's a gamble. Every time you pass that area without stopping, you are betting that your mechanic did his job right 3 weeks ago. As we continue down, gravity pulling at our coattails, the smell of ozone and hot asphalt rises from the road. The tyres are hot, the brakes are warm, and the driver's nerves are frayed. We are managing the beast, keeping it on a leash. But we know that the leash is made of friction material that is only a few centimetres thick. If that material fails, if that bond breaks, the mountain wins. And when the mountain wins on a 6% grade, it doesn't just take the truck, it takes everything. There is a specific exit on Monteagle that appears on no GPS, leads to no town, and offers no services, yet it is arguably the most important piece of infrastructure on the entire mountain. It is a long, ascending chute of deep, loose gravel, carved into the hillside like a scar. It is the runaway truck ramp. To the passenger car driver, it is a curiosity, a sudden, sandy deviation from the highway that prompts a momentary, "What is that?" before they speed away. To the truck driver, it is the gravel trap of last resort. It is the safety net that catches you when physics, mechanics, and luck have all abandoned the cab simultaneously. The psychology of the runaway ramp is complex. It represents salvation, but it also represents failure. No driver wants to take the ramp. Taking the ramp means you have lost control. It means you have failed to manage your descent. It means a tow bill that costs more than your truck is worth, a likely ticket for failure to maintain control, and a permanent mark on your driving record. It is the walk of shame of the trucking industry, but with life or death stakes. Yet, when the brake pedal goes to the floor and the speedometer is climbing past 80, that pile of gravel looks like the most beautiful thing on God's green earth. Let's look at the anatomy of this lifeline. A runaway truck ramp is not just a pile of dirt dumped on the side of the road. It is a carefully engineered arrestor bed. The science here relies on fluid dynamics, even though we are dealing with solids. The ramp is filled with a specific type of aggregate, usually smooth, rounded pea gravel, cleaned of all fines and dirt. This is crucial. If the gravel were angular or compacted with dirt, it would act like a hard surface, and the truck would just roll right over it. But round, clean gravel behaves like a fluid. It displaces. When a truck hits the bed, the tyres sink. They don't just roll, they plough. The gravel flows around the wheels, creating immense drag. It is the same principle as trying to run in knee-deep water, but magnified by the weight of 80,000 pounds. The kinetic energy of the speeding truck is transferred into the displacement of the stones. It is a violent, chaotic transfer of energy. The truck doesn't glide to a halt. It is grabbed, shaken, and buried. The deceleration forces are extreme, often exceeding 1 g. That means the driver is thrown forward into their seatbelt with a force equal to their own body weight. If they aren't wearing a belt, they're going through the windshield. Monteagle features a gravity ramp, which combines the arrestor bed with an uphill slope. This is the gold standard of stopping power. You have the drag of the gravel working in concert with gravity to bleed off that lethal speed. The placement of these ramps is not random. Engineers analyse the grade, identifying the points where brake failure is most likely to occur, usually about 2/3 of the way down, where the heat in the drums has reached critical mass. I remember a conversation with a heavy-haul tow truck operator named Big Mike, who works out of Jasper. Mike has pulled more trucks out of that gravel than he can count. People think it's like landing in a pillow, Mike told me, wiping grease from a wrench. It ain't a pillow, it's a car crash without the other car. When a guy hits that gravel at 90, the truck dives. The front axle buries itself 4 feet deep in a split second. The bumper gets ripped off. The oil pan gets sheared. The drive shaft snaps like a twig. The load inside the trailer, it keeps coming. I've seen steel beams punch through the back of the cab. It saves your life, yeah, but it usually kills the truck. Mike's description highlights the violence of the event. Imagine the sensory experience inside the cab. You are careening down the mountain, smoke pouring from your wheels, the smell of burning resin choking you. You see the sign, runaway ramp, 1 to 2 mile. You have seconds to decide. Your mind is racing. Can I ride it out? Is there a flat spot coming? If I take the ramp, I'm fired. If I don't, I die. The indecision is the killer. If you wait too long, you miss the entrance. You make the choice. You yank the wheel to the right. The truck leaves the smooth concrete and hits the transition pavement. Then, wham! You hit the gravel. The noise is deafening, a roar like a landslide as thousands of rocks pummel the undercarriage. The steering wheel whips violently out of your hands. Drivers often break their wrists or thumbs if they hold on too tight. The windshield turns white with dust. Everything in the sleeper berth, your TV, your microwave, your clothes, comes flying forward. And then, silence. Sudden, ringing silence, broken only by the hiss of a ruptured radiator or the ticking of cooling metal. You are alive. You are buried up to the frame rails in grey stones, but you are alive. There is a legendary story from the early 90s about a driver named Harlan. Harlan was an old-school wildcatter hauling a reefer trailer full of frozen chickens. He lost his brakes near the top of the grade on a rainy Tuesday night. He bypassed the first ramp thinking he could save it. He couldn't. By the time he saw the second ramp, he was doing over 100 miles per hour. Witnesses said the truck looked like a blur. Harlan hit the ramp so hard that his truck actually skipped over the first 50 feet of gravel before digging in. The truck stopped, but the momentum was so great that the trailer twisted, snapped the kingpin, and vaulted over the tractor, spilling 40,000 pounds of frozen poultry onto the hillside. Harlan walked away with a broken collarbone and a story that nobody believed until they saw the police photos. The chicken run, they called it. The technical design of the ramp entrance is also critical. It has to be wide enough to catch a truck that is swaying and out of control, but it can't be so wide that cars mistake it for an exit. The signage is aggressive. Flashing lights, massive fonts, red and yellow paint. It screams "Do not enter" to the civilians and "Please enter" to the desperate. But even with the signs, tourists sometimes pull into the mouth of the ramp to check their maps or make a phone call. It is a terrifying thought, stopping your minivan in the barrel of a gun. Once the truck is stopped, the ordeal isn't over. Extracting a rig from a gravel trap is a specialised operation. You can't just hook a chain to it and pull. The resistance is too great. You'll rip the frame apart. Big Mike explained the process to me. You have to dig it out first, he said. We got shovels. We dig around the wheels, under the axles, clear a path. Then we use a rotator, a massive crane-like wrecker, to lift the front end up while another wrecker pulls from the rear. It takes hours, and the state charges you for the gravel. Every rock that gets contaminated with oil or diesel has to be replaced. That's an hazmat cleanup bill on top of the tow bill. The cost is astronomical. A typical extraction can run anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000, depending on the damage and the spill. For an owner-operator, taking the ramp is often a bankruptcy event. This financial terror is a real factor in the split-second decision-making process. Drivers will gamble with their lives to save their livelihood. It is a dark calculus performed in the panic of the moment. Sometimes you see scarecrow tracks on the ramp. These are the tracks of a driver who entered the ramp, slowed down enough to regain control, and then managed to steer back out before sinking too deep. It's a touch and go. It is incredibly dangerous and illegal, but it happens. You can see the ruts weaving in and out of the gravel mouth, a physical record of a driver changing their mind at the last second. There is also the maintenance aspect. The gravel in the ramp must be fluffed regularly. Over time, rain and gravity can compact the stones, making them harder and less effective. The Department of Transportation uses a specialised rake, dragged behind a tractor, to loosen the bed. If you see a crew out there raking the ramp, it looks like a Zen garden for giants. They are resetting the trap, ensuring that the next victim sinks properly. The ramp stands as a silent judge. When you drive past it and see a truck buried in there, deep in the gravel, there is no mockery on the CB radio. There is no "Ha! Look at that idiot." There is a solemn hush. Every driver knows that could be them. It could be a failed slack adjuster, a blown airline, a moment of distraction. The truck in the ramp is a visual reminder of the thin line between a successful delivery and a disaster. It is a monument to the failure of the machine and the survival of the man. In the winter, the ramps present a different challenge. If the gravel freezes into a solid block, it loses its fluid properties. It becomes a launch ramp. To combat this, some modern ramps are heated or treated with brine, but on Monteagle the sheer volume of gravel makes that difficult. Drivers are warned that in freezing conditions the stopping distance in the ramp will increase. It's another layer of Russian roulette. I passed the ramp just last week. It was empty, the gravel smooth and inviting in a morbid way. But I looked closely and saw the debris scattered in the brush nearby. Shards of fiberglass, a broken mud flap, a twisted piece of aluminum bumper. These are the artifacts of survival. They are the pieces of trucks that were sacrificed to the god of gravity so that the driver could go home to their family. There is a particular haunting quality to the runaway ramp sign itself. It is one of the few road signs that acknowledges the possibility of total loss of control. Most signs are regulatory, speed limit, no passing. The ramp sign is existential. It says, if you are dying, go here. It is an admission by the highway engineers that sometimes the road is too much for the vehicle. It is a concession to the wildness of the geography. So when you see that gravel strip shooting up the hillside, give a little nod of respect. It is the gravel trap of last resort, the ugly, expensive, violent embrace that says, I will break your truck, I will empty your bank account, but I will keep your heart beating. And in the end, that is a trade every driver is willing to make, even if they pray they never have to. In the isolation of a truck cab, the only thing louder than the diesel engine is the silence. At 3 a.m, when the dashboard lights are the only constellation you can see, and the white line is hypnotizing you into a trance, the human mind starts to look for company. For decades, that company has lived in a small rectangular box bolted to the overhead console, the Citizens Band radio. Channel 19 is the town square, the newsroom, and the confessional booth of the American highway. And on Monteagle Mountain, it is also the medium for ghost stories. The CB radio is a peculiar piece of technology. Operating on the 27 MHz band, it relies on line-of-sight propagation for clear communication. However, the geology of the Cumberland Plateau messes with the physics. The deep rock cuts and sudden elevation changes create dead zones, where the signal vanishes instantly, and skip zones, where atmospheric conditions bounce signals from hundreds of miles away. You might be trying to talk to a driver a mile ahead of you and get nothing but static, only to suddenly hear a guy in Oklahoma talking about his divorce as clear as a bell. This ethereal, unpredictable nature of the radio waves makes it the perfect carrier for the uncanny. The history of the CB is tied to the rebellious spirit of the trucker. While the service was created in the late 1940s, it exploded in the 1970s as a tool to evade speed traps and organise during the oil crisis strikes. It was the original encrypted chat app. But on Monteagle, the chatter shifts from bare reports, police sightings, to something darker when the sun goes down. The mountain has a way of loosening tongues and conjuring memories. There is a persistent legend on this stretch of I-24 involving the night watchman. The story varies depending on who you talk to, but the core is always the same. It usually happens on foggy nights, the kind where the mist from the valley rises up and smothers the road in a grey blanket. Drivers report seeing a set of dim, yellow headlights, following them in the mirrors. They look like the old sealed beam lights of a 1950s rig, distinctively round and weak compared to modern LEDs. The lights stay perfectly paced with you, hovering right at the edge of visibility. You radio back, "Hey driver, go ahead and pass, I'm heavy," but there is no response. No click of the mic, no "roger that," just the static hiss. Then, as you hit the steepest part of the descent, the lights vanish. You look in the mirror, nothing. You look out the window, nothing. The truck behind you simply ceases to exist. Some old-timers claim this is the spirit of a driver who lost his brakes back in the macadam days and rode his rig off the horseshoe curve. They say he follows trucks down to ensure they don't make the same mistake, acting as a spectral buffer. It's a comforting thought, perhaps, a guardian angel with 18 wheels, but it still sends a shiver down your spine when you see those yellow orbs, floating in the dark. Then there are the auditory hallucinations. Or are they? The phenomenon of radio bleed is real, where powerful stations overpower weaker ones, but the voices heard on Monteagle are often oddly specific. I spoke to a driver named Skeeter in a truck stop in Manchester, who swore on his CDL that the radio saved his life. He was coming down the mountain on a clear, dry night. He was empty, feeling confident, perhaps a little too fast. Suddenly a voice cut through the squelch, loud and urgent. "Brake check northbound. Ice on the bridge. Watch the black ice, driver." Skeeter was confused. It was 40 degrees out. There shouldn't be ice. But the urgency in the voice made him lift his foot. He tapped his brakes, slowing from 65 to 50. As he rounded the bend onto the bridge over the gorge, his truck gave a sickening little shimmy. The bridge deck was glazed over. Frozen condensation from the damp air rising out of the ravine, a localized microclimate that defied the ambient temperature. If he'd hit it at full speed, he would have jackknifed into the wall. He grabbed the mic. "Thanks for the heads up, driver. Where are you at?" Silence. He scanned the road. There were no other trucks around. The voice had sounded old, crackly, like it was coming from a tube radio, not a digital one. Skeeter doesn't drive the left lane on bridges anymore. We also have to talk about the black dog. This isn't strictly a radio phenomenon, but it is discussed on Channel 19 constantly. The black dog is the trucking version of a maritime siren. It is a hallucination born of extreme fatigue. When you've been driving for 11 hours staring at the lines, your brain starts to misinterpret the visual data. Shadows stretch and morph. Drivers claim to see a large black dog running across the highway just at the limit of their headlight beams. You swerve to miss the dog and you put your truck in the ditch. The warning on the radio is often coded. "Hey hand, if the dog is barking, park it." It means, "You sound tired. Get off the road before you kill someone." It's a community policing mechanism, a way of looking out for each other cloaked in folklore. Technically, the radio environment on Monteagle is a mess of heterodyne noise. This is the screeching, wailing sound produced when two transmitters are broadcasting on the same frequency at slightly different pitches. In the valleys, this noise amplifies. It sounds like a choir of banshees. Amidst this electronic screaming, hearing a clear human voice can feel like a miracle or a curse. There are linear amplifiers, illegal high-power boosters used by some hobbyists, that can bleed over 4 or 5 channels at once. These mud ducks, as they are derisively called, often broadcast religious sermons, conspiracy theories, or just loop recordings of bizarre noises. driving through a dark mountain pass while a disembodied voice screams about the apocalypse adds a layer of surreal, horror to the job. There is a specific spot near the runaway ramp where the radio often picks up interference that sounds like Morse code. Engineers will tell you it's likely interference from a nearby cell tower or a military installation, but the drivers have their own theory. They say it's the dead man's click. In the old days, before voice-activated mics, a driver having a heart attack or a stroke would often just key the mic, click, 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 trying to signal for help. The rhythm of the static near mile marker 135 has that frantic, desperate cadence. It's a rhythmic ghost story that plays out on the signal meter of your Cobra 29. One of the most touching ghosts isn't scary at all. It's the legend of the coffee lady. Back in the 1960s, there was a waitress at a diner near the summit who was famous for giving free coffee to truckers who looked like they were falling asleep. She died years ago, and the diner is long gone, bulldozed for a parking lot. But every now and then, a rookie driver will key up the mic and ask, "Hey, is that diner still open at the top? I'm fading fast." And an older voice will come back, gentle and low. "Just keep rolling, son. You got enough in the thermos to make it." It's a collective memory, a shared delusion that keeps the spirit of hospitality alive in a world that has become increasingly automated and cold. The CB radio is dying in a way. The younger generation relies on Discord or cell phones. The chatter is thinning out. But on Monteagle, when the cell service drops to 1 bar and the 4G network fails, the analog waves of Channel 19 are still the only lifeline. The ghosts need the static. They can't live in the crystal clear digital signal of a smartphone. They need the hiss, the pop, and the wavering carrier wave to manifest. I remember a night when I was running team with a guy named Miller. I was in the sleeper trying to doze off, listening to the low murmur of the radio Miller had left on. I heard a conversation that chilled me. 2 drivers were talking about a wreck they had just passed. They described the truck, a blue Kenworth, jackknifed, spilled load of lumber. They described the ambulance, the flares. I got up and looked out the windshield. "Where's the wreck?" I asked Miller. He looked at me, confused. "What wreck? We haven't passed a car in 20 miles. I turned up the volume. The voices were gone. I checked the news the next morning. There had been a wreck involving a blue Kenworth and a load of lumber, 3 years prior on that exact date. Maybe it was a rebroadcast. Maybe it was Skip from another state. Or maybe, just maybe, the energy of the event was so intense that it imprinted itself on the atmosphere, replaying itself like a loop of tape for anyone with a receiver tuned to 27.185. Vistas. The folklore of Monteagle serves a purpose. It keeps you awake. It keeps you alert. When you're looking for phantom headlights, you're checking your mirrors. When you're listening for a ghost voice warning you of ice, you're paying attention to the road surface. The fear is functional. The stories are a survival mechanism, passed down from the knights of the road to the squires, wrapped in the guise of entertainment. So, if you ever find yourself driving I-24 late at night, and you see a rig with dim yellow lights in your mirror that doesn't show up on your radar, don't panic. Just give a little wave. It might be the night watchman, making sure you make it down the grey that took him. And if you hear a voice on Channel 19 warning you to slow down, don't ask who it is. Just lift your foot. The ghosts of Monteagle don't talk for their health. They talk for yours. If the ghosts on the radio are the spectral threats of Monteagle, the fog is the tangible, suffocating monster that swallows you whole. We are leaving the realm of folklore now and entering the domain of meteorology, specifically the violent and unpredictable microclimate of the Cumberland Plateau. This isn't just bad weather. This is a geological ambush. The mountain doesn't just sit there, it actively manufactures its own atmosphere, creating conditions that can turn a routine drive into a game of Russian roulette played at 60 miles per hour. The scientific term for what happens here is orographic lift. As moist air masses move across the Tennessee Valley, they hit the vertical wall of the plateau. The air is forced upward. As it rises, it expands and cools. When it hits the dew point, that moisture condenses instantly into a cloud. But this cloud isn't floating nicely in the sky. It is sitting directly on the interstate. You aren't driving under the weather, you're driving inside it. The density of Monteagle fog is legendary. It is not the soft, romantic mist you see in movies. It is a solid, opaque wall of white cotton. Drivers call it driving inside a ping pong ball. 1 minute you have a mile of visibility and a starry sky. You round a curve and wham, the world vanishes. The hood of your truck disappears. The taillights of the vehicle 50 feet ahead of you are swallowed. You're suspended in a void of grey with no horizon, no reference points, and no depth perception. This creates a terrifying sensory deprivation. Your brain relies on visual cues to judge speed. Without the passing trees or the texture of the road, 60 miles per hour feels like standing still. You check the speedometer and it says 50, but your internal gyroscope is spinning. This is where vertigo sets in. Drivers have been known to drift out of their lanes simply because they feel like they are tilting. You find yourself gripping the steering wheel with a force that turns your knuckles white. The literal white knuckle grip that gives this sensation its name. It's a primal reaction, as if squeezing the wheel harder will somehow squeeze more vision out of your eyes. I spoke with a veteran driver named Quiet Ray, a man who hauled hazardous materials for 30 years. He told me about a night on Monteagle in November, the peak of fog season. It was so thick, Ray said, that I couldn't see the white line on the road. I had to roll down my window, turn off the heat so the glass wouldn't fog up on the inside, and lean my head out into the cold. I was driving by looking straight down at the pavement, watching the reflector strips pass by my front tyre. Thump, 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 thump. That sound was the only thing telling me I was still on the road. I did that for 6 miles at 15 miles an hour. When I got to the bottom, my neck was frozen stiff and my left eye was swollen shut from the wind. Ray's technique, the head out the window method, is a desperate measure from the old school. Modern trucks have better defrosters, but they also have a new enemy, LED headlights. In clear weather, LEDs are brilliant. In fog, they are a liability. The intense blue-white light reflects off the water droplets in the air, creating a wall of glare that blinds the driver. It's like driving with a mirror in front of your face. You'll see experienced drivers switch off their headlights and run only their running lights and fog lamps, which are yellow and mounted low, to try and undercut the cloud layer. It's a counterintuitive act of faith, turning off your main lights to see better in the dark. Then there is the ice. If fog is the blinder, ice is the assassin. The plateau is high enough that it often sits below the freezing point while the valleys on either side are raining. You can be driving in a heavy thunderstorm in Manchester, hitting the wipers at full speed, and as you climb the grade the rain stops making noise. The windshield goes silent. That silence is the most dangerous sound in trucking. It means the water has turned to slush and then to ice. The road surface transforms from wet asphalt to a sheet of black glass. The most treacherous spots are the bridges. I-24 crosses several deep gorges and ravines on the plateau. A bridge deck exposed to the cold air from both above and below freezes much faster than the road on solid ground. This is basic thermodynamics, but in the heat of the moment it is easily forgotten. You hit the bridge, and suddenly the steering wheel goes light. All feedback from the tyres vanishes. The truck is floating. If you touch the brakes now, you jackknife. If you steer too hard, you spin. You have to hold your breath, keep the wheel straight, and pray you have enough momentum to coast across the ice without sliding into the barrier. There was a catastrophic event in the winter of 2002 that illustrates this perfectly. A sudden flash freeze hit the mountain. Fog rolled in, wetted the road, and then the temperature dropped 10 degrees in 20 minutes. It created a condition known as freezing fog, where the water droplets freeze on contact with any surface. The Interstate became an ice rink. Over 40 vehicles piled up near the summit. It wasn't a high-speed crash. It was a slow-motion disaster. Trucks would crest the hill, see the wreck, hit the brakes, and simply slide, uncontrollably, inevitably, into the pile. Drivers were jumping out of their cabs and scrambling up the embankments to avoid being crushed by the next incoming slider. It was a scene of mechanical carnage dictated entirely by a 2-degree drop in temperature. The Tennessee Department of Transportation, TDOT, has spent millions trying to fight the mountain's weather. They installed a sophisticated fog warning system between mile markers 132 and 137. It uses sensors to detect visibility levels. When the fog rolls in, variable speed limit signs automatically drop. The legal speed to 50, 40 or even 30 mph. Massive strobe lights begin to flash, cutting through the murk to warn drivers. It is a high-tech response to a prehistoric problem. But even with the lights and the sensors, The decision ultimately rests with the driver, and the pressure to keep moving is immense. There is a psychological phenomenon called get-there-itis. You're 20 minutes from your delivery, you're tired, you see the fog warning signs, but you think, I can handle it, I'll just go slow. That hubris is what fills the ditches. The smart driver, the one who wants to retire, knows when to throw in the towel. There is no shame in parking on the shoulder, if it's wide enough, or pulling into the runaway ramp entrance, just the paved part to wait it out. But sitting still while the clock on your electronic log ticks down is a mental torture of its own. The interior of the cab changes during these events. You crank the defroster to high, turning the air conditioning compressor on to dry the air while the heater core warms it. The cab gets hot and dry, drying out your contact lenses and making your throat scratchy. The wipers are fighting a losing battle against the freezing drizzle, slapping a rhythm of thwack hiss, thwack hiss. You're leaning forward, nose almost touching the glass, muscles tense, scanning for the faint glow of the fog line, the white painted line on the right shoulder. That line is your lifeline. If you lose it, you're lost. The microclimate also affects the machine. Diesel fuel contains paraffin wax. In extreme cold, this wax can crystallize, clogging the fuel filter and starving the engine. This is called gelling up. While modern fuel is treated with anti-gel additives, the wind chill on the mountain can be severe enough to freeze a fuel line on an exposed frame rail. Imagine the terror of your engine sputtering and dying right in the middle of a blind curve in dense fog. You lose your power steering, you lose your air compressor, you're a sitting duck in a cloud bank. There is a specific smell associated with these nights, the smell of ozone and road salt. When the plows are out dumping tons of sodium chloride and calcium chloride on the asphalt, the spray kicks up and coats everything. It dries into a white film on your windshield, forcing you to use your washer fluid constantly. If you run out of washer fluid on Monteagle in a snowstorm, you're effectively blindfolded. Experienced drivers carry a spare gallon of blue fluid strapped to the catwalk for this exact reason. The transition out of the fog is almost as jarring as entering it. You descend below the cloud base, and suddenly, snap, the world reappears. You can see the lights of the valley floor twinkling below. The tension releases from your shoulders so fast it hurts. You realize you have been holding your breath for 10 miles. You check your mirrors, and you can see the wall of grey cloud hanging above you, a ceiling you just fell through. It looks peaceful from below, fluffy and harmless. But you know better. You know that up there, inside the cotton, is a chaotic, blinding hell where metal meets ice and men meet their limits. The weather on Monteagle is a reminder that despite our horsepower and our technology, we're still operating in the wild. We have paved the mountain, but we haven't tamed the air above it. The fog doesn't care about your schedule. The ice doesn't care about your safety rating. They are the elemental guardians of the plateau, demanding a toll of patience and respect. And if you refuse to pay that toll, they will extract it from you in twisted steel and shattered glass. As the interstate flattens out atop the plateau, we enter a strange, momentary truce with the landscape. The brutal climb is behind us, the terrifying descent is yet to come, and for a few miles, we are driving through a corridor that feels distinctively different from the rest of Tennessee. We are passing through the Domain, a 13,000-acre parcel of land owned by the University of the South, known simply as Sewanee. It is here that the grit of the trucking world brushes shoulders with the Gothic elegance of academia, separated only by a fence line and a deep man-made canyon known as the Cut. To the driver, the Cut is a landmark of relief and awe. It is a massive excavation, where the engineers of Interstate 24 blasted directly through the sandstone cap of the plateau. Instead of going over the highest ridges, they sliced them open. The result is a highway flanked by towering walls of layered rock, revealing millions of years of geological history and striations of rust red, tan and grey. These walls are so high and steep that they block out the surrounding forest, creating a tunnel-like effect. When you enter the Cut, the sound of the highway changes. The roar of the tyres bounces off the stone faces, creating a chaotic echo chamber. It amplifies the mechanical noise, making every rattle and turbo whistle sound twice as loud. This section of road represents a violent intersection of two very different worlds. On the asphalt, you have the knights of the road, sweaty, caffeinated, hauling steel and pork bellies. Up above, hidden in the trees beyond the rock walls, you have the angels of the mountain, Students in academic gowns, studying poetry and theology in buildings that look like they were airlifted from Oxford, England. The University of the South was founded in 1857 with the grand vision of being a Southern Ivy League, a fortress of learning isolated from the distractions of the world, and for 100 years it was isolated. The arrival of I-24 shattered that solitude, carving a noise trench right through the edge of their sanctuary. There is a technical consequence to the cut that catches many drivers off guard: the wind tunnel effect. The prevailing winds sweeping across the plateau are often blocked by the dense forests, but when they hit this open channel they accelerate. It's the Venturi effect in action. You can be driving on a calm night, enters the cut, and suddenly feel a massive invisible hand shove the trailer sideways. If you are pulling a high cube trailer, lightweight freight in a toolbox, this lateral gust can be terrifying. It demands an immediate, intuitive countersteer. Veteran drivers instinctively tighten their grip as they enter the rock walls, anticipating the shove. The geology exposed here is world-class. The sandstone is part of the Pennsylvanian accumulation, a sedimentary rock that is incredibly hard and resistant to erosion. This is why the plateau exists in the first place. The softer limestone underneath eroded away, leaving this hard tableland standing. During the construction of this section in the 1960s, the blasting crews encountered pockets of rock so dense that standard drilling bits would melt. They had to use diamond-tipped drills and significantly higher charges of explosives. The scars of those boreholes are still visible on the cliff faces, vertical lines that look like the claw marks of a giant beast. But the most pervasive element of this stretch is the legend of the Sewanee Angel. It is a piece of folklore that has bled from the university out onto the highway. The tradition holds that a guardian angel watches over the domain. Students, when they drive out of the university gates, known as the gates of the domain, tap the roof of their car. This is to summon the angel so it will ride with them and protect them until they return. The catch: the angel cannot fly faster than 55 miles per hour. If you speed, the angel jumps off. While truckers don't typically tap their roofs, it's a long reach to the ceiling of a sleeper cab, the myth has permeated the CB radio chatter. You will hear drivers half-joking say, "Slow it down through the domain, driver, don't lose your angel." It's a superstition that aligns perfectly with the safety needs of the road. Whether you believe in a celestial guardian or just the Tennessee Highway Patrol, who love to sit in the median near exit 134, the result is the same: the traffic slows down. The angel serves as a spectral speed governor. I once met a driver named Professor, a nickname earned because he wore reading glasses and actually read books, at the Pilot in Monteagle. He told me he loved driving through the cut at sunrise. The sun hits those rock walls, he said, and they glow like gold. For a minute you forget you're hauling fertilizer. You look up at the overpass, and sometimes you see people standing there, just watching the trucks. It's the only time we get an audience. He was referring to the pedestrian bridges and overpasses that connect the trails of the domain. Hikers and students often stand on these bridges, looking down at the river of steel flowing beneath them. It's a strange moment of connection, the static observer and the kinetic traveller. Drivers often blast their air horns when they see kids waving from the bridge. Honk honk. It's a universal language of acknowledgement. For a brief second, the student worrying about a philosophy exam and the trucker worrying about a delivery deadline share a moment of human contact. The proximity of the university also brings a unique hazard to the highway: the fog of academia, or rather, the fog of the uninitiated. During parents' weekends or graduation, the interstate near exit 134 becomes clogged with Volvos and SUVs, driven by people who are looking at their GPS instead of the road. They merge onto the highway at 40 miles per hour, terrified of the trucks. A fully loaded semi needs a mile to get up to speed. A confused parent merging slowly is a recipe for disaster. The Sewanee merge is a known headache. You have to watch the on-ramps like a hawk, ready to move over or slam on the brakes for a station wagon with a "My child is an honour student" bumper sticker. There is also the matter of the cross. Perched on the very edge of the plateau, overlooking the valley, stands the War Memorial Cross, a massive 60-foot stone structure on the university grounds. While you can't see it directly from the interstate, its presence is felt. At night it is illuminated, a beacon in the darkness. For decades, drivers coming up the old Route 41 could see it shining above the tree line. It served as a lighthouse for the landlocked. Make it to the cross, and you've made the climb, they used to say. Even now, on the modern I-24, knowing that the cross is just a few miles through the woods gives the location a sense of gravity. It marks the highest point, the spiritual apex of the journey before the fall. The ecological impact of the road on the domain is a constant source of study for the university's biology department. They have studied the road ecology, how the noise and pollution affect the nesting habits of birds and the migration of salamanders. It turns out the noise of the Jake brakes echoes into the hollows, changing the way birds sing. They have to sing louder and at a higher pitch to be heard over the Cummins and Detroits. So, in a very literal sense, the truckers are rewriting the songs of nature on the mountain. The cut also acts as a drainage channel. During the heavy downpours common on the plateau, water cascades off the high rock walls in makeshift waterfalls. It's beautiful, but dangerous. The water hits the shoulder and can spray across the lanes. In winter, these waterfalls freeze into massive icicles, ice fangs, that hang precariously over the breakdown lane. Road crews have to go out with long poles or even shotguns in the old days to knock them down before they fall onto a passing vehicle. As we exit the cut, the walls drop away and the forest rushes back in. The sensation of being in a tunnel evaporates. We're back in the open, exposed to the full force of the crosswinds and the expansive sky. We pass the exit for Sewanee, leaving behind the Gothic towers and the ghosts of poets. We're truckers, not scholars. Our library is the logbook. Our lecture hall is the cab. But for those few miles, passing through the split stone of the domain, we are visitors in a sanctuary. We carry the noise and the haste of the modern world through a place that values silence and slowness. The Swanee angel might not ride in the passenger seat of a Peterbilt. She probably prefers a quieter ride, but the superstition holds a kernel of truth. This stretch of flat, high-speed road between the climb and the descent is a deception. It lures you into complacency. The cut feels secure, like a cradle of stone. But it is just the hallway leading to the back door of the mountain, and the back door is where the real trouble begins. The sign ahead reads "Downgrade ahead," and the angel, if she was with us, is likely hopping off right about now, leaving us to handle gravity on our own. The history of aviation safety is often described as tombstone technology, meaning that every safety regulation, every checklist, and every redundant system was implemented only after a tragedy proved it necessary. The trucking industry is no different. The road over Monteagle is not just paved with asphalt and concrete, it is paved with lessons learned the hard way. Every warning sign, every guardrail, and every paint stripe represents a moment in the past where someone ran out of luck and the authorities decided, we can't let that happen again. When you drive I-24 today, you are navigating a landscape that has been curated by catastrophe. Take, for example, the sheer volume of signage. It feels excessive. Trucks use lower gear, 50-emp curve, steep grade ahead. It seems like the highway department is yelling at you, and in a way they are. They are yelling to drown out the complacency that kills. In the 1970s, the signage was sparse. A driver was expected to have road sense, but road sense isn't a standardized metric, and as the industry deregulated with the Motor Carrier Act of 1980, a flood of new, inexperienced drivers hit the highways. The Wild West era of trucking brought speed, but it also brought a spike in accidents that forced the government's hand. One of the most grimly fascinating aspects of modern trucking is the post-accident forensic analysis. In the old days, a wreck was a wreck. The police measured the skid marks, took a few photos, and cleared the debris. Today, a crash on Monteagle is a data mining operation. Modern trucks are equipped with an ECM, the electronic control module. It is the black box of the diesel engine. When a truck detects a hard braking event or a sudden deceleration impact, the ECM freezes the data from the last 60 seconds. It records everything. It knows your road speed. It knows your engine RPM. It knows if your foot was on the brake or the throttle. It knows if the cruise control was active. It is a silent witness that cannot be intimidated or lied to. I spoke with a safety director for a large fleet in Nashville who told me about reviewing the data from a rollover on the mountain. The driver swore a car cut him off, the director said. He said he was doing 45. I plugged into the ECM. The data showed he was doing 72, throttle at 100%, right up until 2 seconds before the crash. He didn't even touch the brakes until he was already tipping over. The computer doesn't judge, but it doesn't forgive either. This data has driven a shift in safety mandates. It proved that brake fade wasn't always a mechanical failure. Often, it was operator error. This led to the aggressive implementation of the Commercial Driver's License (CDL) standards in 1992. Before that, in many states, you could drive a semi-truck with a chauffeur's license, the same license used to drive a taxi. You could take your test in a pickup truck and legally drive an 18-wheeler the next day. The carnage on mountain passes like Monteagle was a primary argument for federalizing the license standards. The mountain demanded professionalization. There is a specific curve on the eastbound descent that locals sometimes refer to as Hal's Turn. It's not on any official map, but the older tow truck drivers know it. In the late 80s, a driver named Hal lost a load of steel pipes there. He hit the Jersey barrier so hard that the pipes sheared through the straps, launched over the cab and scattered across the westbound lanes like a handful of toothpicks. Miraculously, no one in the oncoming traffic was killed, but the cleanup took 3 days. The resulting traffic jam backed up into Kentucky. After Hal's wreck, the Department of Transportation installed chevron alignment signs, those big yellow arrows that guide you through the curve. They also grooved the pavement more aggressively in that spot and increased the banking, super elevation of the road during the next repaving cycle. The physical geometry of the highway was altered because of that one event. Hal's bad day became a permanent piece of infrastructure. The barriers themselves have evolved. The W-beam metal guardrails of the past were notoriously weak against heavy trucks. A 40-ton rig would slice through them like butter. On Monteagle, you will notice that the median barriers are almost exclusively Jersey barriers, heavy reinforced concrete shapes designed to deflect a vehicle back into its lane rather than catching it. The shape is specific. The lower slope allows the tyre to ride up, lifting the vehicle slightly to bleed off energy, while the upper vertical face prevents the vehicle from crossing over. It is a brutal way to stop a truck. It destroys the suspension and wheels, but it keeps the truck on its side of the road. We also have to talk about the speed limit 35 for trucks signs. This is a mandate that frustrates many drivers. I can handle 50, they think. But these limits are calculated based on the sight distance and the rollover threshold. A truck has a high centre of gravity. As it goes around a curve, centrifugal force tries to push it to the outside. If that force exceeds the gravitational force holding it down, the truck tips. The margin of error is slim. The 35 mph isn't a suggestion, it is the calculated limit of physics for a worst-case scenario load. There was a period in the 1990s when retro-reflective tape became mandatory. You see it on every trailer now, the red and white striped tape along the sides and rear. This was a direct response to nighttime rear-end collisions. On slow climbs like Monteagle, a truck might be doing 25 km/h while a car approaches at 70 mph. In the dark, depth perception fails. Drivers couldn't see the trailer until they were under it. The tape reflects light from 1,000 feet away. It's a simple sticker, but it changed the visual landscape of the night. It turned invisible obstacles into glowing fences. The most visceral reminders of the danger, however, are the tyre carcasses or gaiters that litter the shoulder. When a retreaded tyre fails due to heat or underinflation, the tread separates from the casing with explosive force. It sounds like a shotgun blast. On Monteagle, the heat generated by braking and cornering puts immense stress on tyres. A blown steer tyre on a descent is a catastrophic event. It pulls the truck violently toward the blown side. If it's the left tyre, you go into the median. If it's the right, you go off the cliff. I remember seeing a rig that had blown a steer tyre near the bottom of the grade. It had ploughed through 300 feet of guardrail. The metal rail was wrapped around the front axle like a steel ribbon. The driver was sitting on the embankment, head in his hands, shaking. He wasn't injured, but he was broken. He had stared death in the face and blinked. The police were there, measuring the skid marks, checking his logbook, starting the process of assigning blame. But in that moment, it wasn't about the law. It was about the raw, kinetic violence of the machine betraying its master. There is a movement now toward active safety systems, collision mitigation radars that will automatically slam on the brakes if they detect stopped traffic. These systems are controversial. On a mountain descent, automatic braking can be dangerous. If the computer decides to slam the brakes while you are managing your air pressure, it could overheat them instantly or cause a skid on a slick patch. The technology is smart, but it doesn't have seat-of-the-pants feel. It doesn't know that the road is slightly off camber or that the trailer is light in the rear. The The signage has also become more dynamic. We now see digital message boards that can be updated in real time. Accident ahead. Right lane blocked. Fog. Slow down. This is a huge leap forward from the static metal signs. It connects the eye in the sky, traffic cameras and dispatchers, to the driver on the ground. It turns the highway into a responsive network, but no matter how many signs they put up, the debris field tells the truth. If you walk the shoulder of I-24, which I don't recommend, you will find the artifacts of disaster. Broken headlight glass, shattered plastic from bumpers, cargo straps that snapped under tension, maybe even a rusted wrench dropped by a tow truck operator 20 years ago. These are the archaeological layers of the highway. They are the twisted metal fossils that prove the mountain is still hungry. One particularly haunting safety feature is the memorial marker. State laws vary, but you will often see small crosses or wreaths tied to the fence near a sharp curve. These aren't official dot signage, but they are the most effective warnings of all. When a driver sees a faded plastic flower arrangement zip-tied to a guardrail, they instinctively lift their foot. It is a communication from one family to a stranger. Someone died here. Please don't be next. So, as we roll past the truck's right lane only signs and the flashing yellow lights, we have to acknowledge that we're driving through a rulebook written in twisted steel. The mandates can feel oppressive, the logbooks, the scales, the speed limiters, but they are the immune response of the system. They are the industry trying to cure itself of the disease of crashing. We respect the signs not because we love authority, but because we know the history. We know that behind every no-engine brake sign, though rare on the mountain itself, common in towns, or stay in gear command, there is a ghost story involving a driver who thought he knew better. If there is a soundtrack to the trucking industry, a sonic signature that defines the modern era of heavy haulage, it is the staccato machine gun bark of the Jacobs engine brake. To the residents of quiet towns, it is a nuisance, a noise pollution that rattles windows and wakes babies. But to the driver descending the 6% grade of Monteagle, that sound is a hymn of salvation. It is the sound of an engine fighting gravity and winning. We are deep in the descent now, and if we were driving a truck from 1960, our brake drums would be glowing cherry red, smoking like a chimney and fading fast. We would be sweating, praying, and searching for a soft ditch. But tonight, in our modern rig, we are calm. We reach for a switch on the dashboard, often a toggle with 3 settings: low, medium, and high. We flip it to high. We lift our foot off the throttle, and then the magic happens. Brrrr! A deep, guttural roar erupts from the exhaust stacks. The truck shudders slightly, and suddenly, without touching the brake pedal, the vehicle slows down. It feels as if a giant hand has reached out from the sky and grabbed the trailer, holding it back. To understand why this is a miracle, we have to look at the mechanics of the diesel engine. Normally, an engine is a power generator. It takes fuel and air, compresses them, ignites them, and pushes the piston down to turn the crankshaft. But the Jake brake, officially the compression release engine brake, flips the script. It turns the engine into a massive air compressor that absorbs power. Here is the technical breakdown. Inside the engine, the pistons are moving up and down. On the compression stroke, the piston moves up, squeezing the air inside the cylinder. This takes energy. Work is being done by the wheels to push the piston up against that pressure. In a normal cycle, diesel would be injected at the top, an explosion would occur, and the energy would be returned to the wheels. The Jake brake intervenes. Right when the piston reaches the very top of its stroke, maximum compression, the mechanism pops the exhaust valve open. Poof! All that compressed air is released out the exhaust pipe. The energy stored in that compressed air is wasted, vented to the atmosphere. The piston then travels down, having given back nothing to the crankshaft. The result is retarding horsepower. A modern 15-litre engine that produces 500 horsepower to pull the load can generate nearly 600 horsepower of braking force. That is 600 horsepower working against gravity. It allows a driver to descend Monteagle in a controlled gear without ever touching the service brakes. The friction brakes stay cool, held in reserve for a true emergency. The invention of this device is a story of terrifying necessity. Clessie Cummins, the founder of the Cummins Engine Company, was driving a truck down the Cajon Pass in California in the 1930s. He was hauling a heavy load and his brakes failed. He survived the runaway, ride by sheer luck and skill, but the experience shook him. He vowed to find a way to use the engine itself to slow the truck. It took him decades to perfect the design, but when he finally introduced it in the 1960s, it revolutionized the industry. Before the Jake, the descent was a gamble. After the Jake, it was a procedure. I recall a conversation with an old-school driver named Gear Jammer Gary. Gary started driving in the era of the two-stroke Detroits, engines that screamed like banshees but had very little natural compression braking. "Son," Gary told me, leaning against his fender, "in the old days, you had to drive the truck down the hill with your wits. You picked a gear so low you were crawling, and if you messed up, if you let it get too fast, you had two choices, ride it out or jump." The first time I drove a truck with a Jake, I thought something was broken. It made so much noise, but when I felt it hold that weight back, I nearly cried. It was like having a second driver helping you pull on the reins. There is a distinct sensory experience to using the Jake. It's not just the sound, it's the vibration. When the Jakes engage, the whole cab resonates. You feel it in the floorboards, in the seat, in your chest. It's a rough mechanical shudder that communicates power, and the sound varies depending on the exhaust setup. A truck with straight pipes, no mufflers, will crackle and pop like gunfire. That's the sound that gets Jakes banned in residential areas. A truck with a modern emission system and a turbo-compound engine has a more muffled, whooshing roar. But to the driver, it's all music. However, the Jake brake is not a set-it-and-forget-it tool. It requires technique. The switches usually allow you to select how many cylinders are braking. In a 6-cylinder engine, low might activate 2 cylinders, medium 4, and high all 6. On Monteagle, you're constantly toggling. The grade varies. On a slightly flatter section, high might slow you down too much, forcing you to get back on the throttle, which defeats the purpose and burns fuel. So you flick it to medium, then the grade steepens, and you flick it back to high. It's like playing an instrument. You're modulating the resistance to match the terrain. There is a critical danger associated with the Jake brake, one that has caused its fair share of wrecks on this very mountain. It is the slippery road paradox. The Jake brake applies retarding force only to the drive wheels of the tractor. It does not brake the trailer wheels. On dry pavement, this is fine. The tyres have plenty of grip. But on a wet, icy or snowy road, the physics change instantly. Imagine pushing a grocery cart. Now imagine pulling it. The Jake brake is effectively pulling back on the tractor while the heavy trailer behind it wants to keep moving forward. If the road is slick, the drag on the tractor wheels can cause them to lose traction and lock up. The trailer, carrying all that momentum, tries to overtake the tractor. This is a jackknife. The trailer swings around, hitting the cab, and the whole rig folds up like a pocket knife. Every winter you hear the same story on the CB. A rookie driver hits a patch of black ice near the top of Monteagle. He panics and lifts his foot off the throttle. The Jake brake, which he left on high, slams into engagement. The drive tyres lock up on the ice. The rear of the tractor slides sideways. Game over. This is why veteran drivers have a reflex. When it starts to rain or snow, the first thing they do is reach for the dash and flip the Jake switch to off, or at least down to low. They trade the assistance of the engine for the stability of the chassis. It makes the descent harder on the brakes, but it keeps the truck in a straight line. There is a psychological comfort in the sound of the Jake. When you're descending in a convoy, the noise is continuous. Brrrr-pee from the truck ahead. Brrrr-pee from your truck. Brrrr-pee from the truck behind. It's a communal signal that everyone is under control. Silence, in this context, is worrying. If a truck flies past you silently on a steep grade, you know his Jakes aren't working, or he's in neutral, the deadly Georgia overdrive, and he is likely in trouble. We must also mention the Jacobs virus, the addiction to the sound. Some drivers, let's be honest, use the Jake just to hear it. They will run straight pipes and flip the switch on underpasses just to hear the echo. It's an assertion of dominance. It says, I am heavy, I am loud, and I am here. While it annoys the public, it is part of the culture. It is the lion's roar of the highway ecosystem. Technically, the modern engine brake has evolved. We now have the variable geometry turbo, VGT, which can act as an exhaust brake, working in tandem with the compression release brake. This provides smoother, quieter braking power. The computer integrates the transmission downshifts with the brake application. In an automated manual transmission, which most new trucks have, you tap the brake pedal and the computer thinks, Okay, he wants to slow down. I will drop 2 gears to raise the RPMs, which makes the Jake more effective, and engage full engine braking. It's seamless. It takes the art out of it and replaces it with an algorithm, but it is undeniably safer. I remember riding with a driver named Deacon, who drove a pristine Peterbilt 379. Deacon treated his Jakes like a fine wine. He wouldn't just flip the switch, he would time it. He knew exactly where the noise barriers were on I-24. He knew exactly which gear created the perfect harmonic resonance. Listen to that, he'd say, as we rumbled down the mountain, the engine holding back 80,000 pounds of coiled steel. That ain't noise, that's the sound of money staying in my pocket instead of going to a brake shop. But even with Jakes, the laws of physics apply. The engine brake has a limit. It is rated for a certain retarding horsepower. If your speed gets too high, say, if you let the truck hit 2200 RPM, the efficiency drops off, or worse, you float the valves and destroy the engine. The sweet spot is usually high in the RPM range, right below the red line. This feels counterintuitive to a car driver. In a car, high RPMs sound like stress. In a truck descending a mountain, high RPMs mean maximum braking power. You want the engine screaming so the brakes don't have to smoke. As we near the bottom of the steepest section, the reliance on the Jake eases. We toggle the switch from high to low. The aggressive bark softens to a gentle burble. We have used the engine's own compression to fight the mountain, turning the very mechanism of power against itself to buy us safety. The brake drums are cool to the touch, relatively speaking. The air pressure tanks are full. We have survived the worst of the grade not by stopping the wheels but by choking the engine. It is a brilliant piece of engineering, this idea of Clessy Cummins. It transformed the mountain from a graveyard into a roadway. It turned a terrifying freefall into a managed descent. And while the suburbanites might curse the noise as we roll through their valleys, they should remember that noise is the sound of 80,000 pounds not crashing into their living room. It is the sound of control, and on Monteagle, control is the only currency that matters. As we level off at the summit, the adrenaline of the climb has barely subsided when a new form of anxiety takes hold. It isn't caused by gravity or fog, but by a rectangular white sign that carries the weight of the law. Mandatory brake check area. All trucks must stop. This is the altar of the Monteagle grade, the place where you must pause and offer proof that your machine is worthy of the descent. It is here that the scales of judgment await, sometimes literal scales, sometimes the watchful eyes of the Tennessee Department of Transportation, TDOT, officers who roam these pull-offs like sharks in shallow water. The brake check area is not a suggestion. It is a wide expanse of asphalt on the shoulder, often scarred with oil stains and tyre marks. When you pull in, the atmosphere changes. The roar of the highway is just a few feet away, but inside the check area, there is a strange, industrial intimacy. You see drivers walking around their rigs, thumping tyres with wooden bats or iron bars. It looks like a primitive ritual, a rhythmic percussion section, in the symphony of the Interstate. Thump, thump, thump. The sound tells you everything. A sharp, ringing bounce means the tyre is inflated and healthy. A dull, hollow thud means you have a problem. But the real judgment happens underneath the chassis. This is where the technical reality of the air brake system is exposed. You will see drivers, some young and fit, others old and stiff, crawling on the ground, flashlight in hand, sliding under the trailer axles. They're checking the slack adjusters and the pushrod travel. Let's get technical for a moment because this is the difference between life and death on the grade. An air brake chamber is a metal canister that converts air pressure into mechanical force. When you push the pedal, air fills the chamber, pushing a diaphragm which pushes a rod out. This rod turns the slack adjuster, a lever, which turns the S-cam, which pushes the shoes against the drum. The critical metric is the stroke. How far does that rod have to travel to engage the brakes? For a standard Type 30 brake chamber, the legal limit is usually 2 inches. If the pushrod travels more than 2 inches, even by 1/4 of an inch, the brake is considered out of adjustment. It means the shoes are too far from the drum. In a panic stop or a long drag down a mountain, the chamber will bottom out. The rod will hit its limit before the shoes are fully pressed against the drum. You lose braking power on that wheel. If you have 2 or 3 brakes out of adjustment, you're legally and physically driving a sled, not a truck. The anxiety of the brake check area is amplified by the presence of the bear. DOT officers know that Monteagle is a magnet for equipment failure, so they hunt here. They aren't looking for speeders, they are looking for mechanical sins. A level 1 inspection is the trucker's nightmare. It takes about an hour. The officer goes under the truck on a creeper. They measure the pushrod travel with a ruler. They check for chafed airlines. They look for cracks in the frame. They check your logbook to the minute. If they find a defect, say a frayed brake hose or a pushrod that travels 2.1 inches, they slap a red sticker on your windshield. Out of service. That is the scarlet letter of the industry. It means you cannot move that truck until a mobile mechanic comes out and fixes it right there on the side of the road. It costs hundreds of dollars for the repair, thousands in fines, and it ruins your safety rating, CSA score. A bad CSA score means more inspections in the future. It is a death spiral. I recall a story from a driver named Red, a fiery redhead who drove a flatbed. He was pulled in for an inspection right here at the Monteagle check area. The officer was young, fresh out of the academy, and eager to find a fault. He spent 45 minutes under Red's trailer. He came out, dusted off his uniform and said, "Driver, your equipment is perfect. I can't find a single thing wrong." Red, instead of just saying thanks, grinned and said, "That's because I spend more time under it than you do." It was a bold retort, but it highlighted a truth. Safety is a personal discipline. The inspection is just a test of that discipline. There is also the technology of the weigh station in motion. As you approach the official scale houses, like the ones near Manchester, you drive over sensors embedded in the highway. These weigh the truck at speed. They also check your credentials electronically via a transponder on your windshield, usually a device called PrePass or DriveWise. This little plastic box is the source of a specific dopamine hit or stomach drop. As you approach the sensor, you watch the light on the box. A green light and a happy chirp mean bypass. You can keep rolling. It feels like winning the lottery. You check your mirror and smile as you cruise past the line of trucks waiting on the ramp. But a red light and a sad buzz mean pull in. Your heart sinks. Why? Is it random? Are you overweight? Did the sensor detect a flat tire? Rolling onto the static scale is a tense affair. You have to creep forward at 3 mph. Steer axle, pause, drive axles, pause, trailer axles, pause. You watch the digital display in the window, or you watch the stoplight. The officer inside the glass booth is the wizard behind the curtain. You can't see them clearly, but they can see you. They are looking at your weight, yes, but they are also looking at you. Are you wearing your seatbelt? Do you look tired? Is your dash cluttered with trash? They are profiling the driver as much as the truck. If you get the green light to leave the scale, the relief is palpable. You rev the engine, grab a gear, and merge back onto the highway, feeling like you escaped a trap. But if the loudspeaker crackles, "Driver, bring your paperwork inside," your day is effectively over. You park, grab your permit book and logbook, and do the walk of shame across the tarmac to the building. Inside, it smells of floor wax and stale coffee. The air is thick with the tension of grown men who are used to being free, now standing like schoolboys in the principal's office. There is a historical context to this scrutiny. In the deregulation era of the 1980s, gypsy truckers ran wild. They would bypass scales, run overweight, and drive trucks that were held together with duct tape and hope. The crackdown was necessary. The mandatory brake check on Monteagle was implemented because too many drivers were skipping the safety check and realizing too late, halfway down the mountain, that they had no brakes. The state decided that if common sense wouldn't make you stop, a threat of a ticket would. One interesting detail about the brake check area is the thermal camera technology, now being tested in some jurisdictions. These cameras look at the wheels of passing trucks. If a wheel is cold while the others are warm, it means that brake isn't working. If a wheel is glowing white hot, it means it's dragging or failing. The technology is stripping away the ability to hide. You can't lie to a thermal sensor. The human element at the check area is a mix of camaraderie and competition. You see drivers glancing at each other's rigs. "Nice chrome," one nod might say. "That tyre looks bald," another glance might imply. Sometimes, if a driver spots a problem on another truck, a loose strap, a light out, they will walk over and tell them, "Hey hand, you got a marker light out on the trailer?" It's a courtesy. It saves the other guy a ticket. It's the code of the road. Us against the bears. I spoke to a heavy haul driver named Tiny, who was predictably enormous, who hauled bridge beams. He told me that the brake check area is where he does his mental reset. He pulls in, checks his chains, checks his brakes, but mostly he takes a minute to respect the gravity of what he is doing. "I'm hauling 120,000 pounds, he said. "If I mess up, I don't just have a wreck. I create a geological event. I stop here to remind myself that I'm not in a hurry." These scales of judgment aren't just about weight. They are about readiness. They are the final gatekeeper. The mountain lies ahead, plunging into the valley. The check area is the last chance to turn back, to call a mechanic, to fix a mistake. Once you release those parking brakes and roll out of the pull-off, you are committed. You have signed the contract with physics. As we finish our walk around, thumping the last tyre and listening for the hiss of air leaks, we climb back into the cab. The seat hisses as it adjusts to our weight. We check the mirrors. We signal left. We merge back into the lane, passing the check brakes sign that is now in our rearview mirror. We have passed the test. The officer didn't stop us. The transponder stayed green. The push rods are within spec. We are legal, we are heavy, and we are ready for the drop. The judgment has been rendered, and the verdict is proceed with caution. The sun has long since dipped below the western ridges, and the twilight that painted the sky in bruises of purple and orange has faded into a heavy, absolute black. We are no longer driving through a landscape. We are driving through a void. The world outside the glass has shrunk to a narrow cone of artificial light, cutting a tunnel through the night. Driving Monteagle in the daylight is a battle against gravity. Driving it at night is a battle against the mind. The darkness on the Cumberland Plateau is not the light-polluted grey of the city suburbs. It is a primal, ink-like substance that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. When you look in your side mirrors, you don't see the trees or the guardrails you know are there. You see nothing. Just the red glow of your own marker lights floating in the abyss. This isolation creates a unique psychological state known to every night hauler. Submarine mode. You dim the dashboard lights until they are faint amber embers, reducing the glare inside so your pupils can dilate to their maximum aperture. You become a creature of the dark, scanning for movement, for reflection, for shadow. The technical challenge of night driving revolves almost entirely around overdriving your headlights. This is a physics problem that has killed more drivers than mechanical failure. Modern LED headlights are brilliant, casting a crisp blue-white light that illuminates the road signs with reflective intensity. But even the best high beams have a limit, usually around 300 to 500 feet. At 60 miles per hour, you are covering 88 feet every second. That means you have about 4 to 6 seconds of visibility. If a deer jumps out or a boulder has fallen into the lane just beyond the reach of your beams, you will hit it before your brain can even process the stop command. You're essentially driving into the future on a delay. Historically, this was even more terrifying. In the 1940s and 50s, trucks ran on 6-volt electrical systems with dim, yellow, sealed beam headlights. Drivers described them as holding a candle in a hurricane. The light was so weak that you often drove by the silhouette of the tree line against the stars rather than looking at the road surface. Old-timers talk about the shadow game, guessing the severity of a curve by how the shadows of the trees moved across the hood. It was a form of navigation that bordered on divination. I recall riding with a driver named Night Owl Johnson, a man who had been running the Chicago to Atlanta lane since the 80s. He refused to drive during the day. "The day is for the amateurs," he told me, sipping a lukewarm coffee from a thermos. At night, the four-wheelers are in bed. The dot scales are closed, mostly. It's just us on the road. But Johnson respected the dark. He had a specific technique for the Monteagle descent at night. He would turn off his fog lights. "Too much glare," he said. "You want the light far out, not right in front of your nose. If you look at the bright patch right in front of the bumper, you get moth vision. You stop looking down the road. The descent at night adds a layer of vertigo. In the day, you can see the valley floor rising to meet you. You have a visual reference for your altitude. At night, that reference is gone. You're falling through space. You feel the truck tilt forward on the grade, you hear the jakes biting into the air, but visually, you are suspended. The only cues are the taillights of the truck ahead, if there is one. Following a rabbit, another truck, is a comfort. You watch his brake lights. If he lights up, you light up. If he swerves, you swerve. He is your minesweeper. But the night also brings the wildlife. The Cumberland Plateau is teeming with deer, wild turkeys, and increasingly coyotes. A deer standing on the highway at night doesn't look like an animal, it looks like two floating green dots, the eye shine reflecting your beams. A collision with a buck at highway speeds can total a modern truck, shattering the fiberglass hood and puncturing the radiator. Drivers are trained to brake, not swerve. If you swerve on a mountain grade to miss a deer, you might miss the animal but hit the cliff. It is a brutal split-second calculus. Sacrifice the hood to save the load, and yourself. There is also the glare war with oncoming traffic. On the winding sections of I-24, the median barrier blocks most of the headlights from the eastbound lanes, but not all. When a truck crests a hill in the oncoming lane, his high beams can hit you right in the eyes, instantly destroying your night vision. It takes up to 7 seconds for the human eye to recover its sensitivity to darkness after being blinded. For those 7 seconds, you are flying blind. This is why you will see professional drivers dim their lights long before the oncoming vehicle is visible. They are watching for the halo of light over the hill, signalling an approach. The auditory landscape shifts at night too. The air is cooler and denser. Sound travels further and with more clarity. The whistle of the turbocharger sounds sharper, like a knife cutting the air. The hum of the tyres on the pavement changes pitch as the temperature of the asphalt drops. You can hear the singing of the tyres on the expansion joints more rhythmically. Clack, 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 clack. It is hypnotic. This is the danger zone for highway hypnosis, where the brain checks out from the monotony. To combat this, drivers keep the cab cool, almost cold. Warm air makes you sleepy. Cold air keeps you sharp. One peculiar phenomenon of the night run is the ghost exit. On the GPS or in the peripheral vision, shadows can look like off-ramps. Tired eyes want to see a place to rest. You might lift your foot thinking, "I'll pull off here," only to realise it's just a patch of darker asphalt or a gap in the trees. It's a hallucination of desire. The mind is projecting what it wants, a bed, onto the canvas of the night. I remember a specific night in late October. The moon was full, illuminating the mist in the valleys so that they looked like lakes of milk. I was descending the grade, the jakes rumbling a low bass note. Suddenly a car passed me doing well over 90. No lights on, just a dark shape tearing through the dark. A ghost runner. Maybe running drugs, maybe running from the cops, or maybe just a drunk with a death wish. He disappeared into the gloom ahead. I waited for the crash, for the spark of metal on concrete. It never came. He just vanished. It was a stark reminder that the mountain attracts all kinds of chaos, and the darkness hides most of it. As we near the bottom of the grade, the lights of the valley towns, Kimball, South Pittsburgh, Jasper, begin to appear through the trees. They look like scattered diamonds on black velvet. It is a welcoming sight. It means civilization. It means coffee. It means the terrifying isolation of the high plateau is ending. We are returning to the world of men. The transition is physical. The tension in the shoulders releases slightly. The grip on the wheel loosens from a stranglehold to a firm handshake. We check the mirrors one last time, ensuring no dark shapes are lurking in the blind spots. The descent is almost over. We have navigated the void, guided by technology and instinct, and the floor of the Tennessee Valley is rushing up to catch us. The sensation of leveling out after a long, steep descent is one of the most distinct physical feelings in trucking. It isn't just a change in the road, it's a change in the physics of your own body. For the last 6 miles, gravity has been trying to pull you through the windshield. You have been bracing against the floorboard, your back muscles tense, your neck rigid. Then, subtly at first, and then all at once, the invisible hand lets go. The truck settles. The suspension unloads. The engine note changes from the aggressive staccato bark of the Jake brake to the smooth rhythmic purr of a diesel under light load. We have reached the valley floor. We are now rolling into the Sequatchie Valley, a geological trench that is one of the longest and deepest in the world. To the geologist, it is an anticline, a fold in the Earth's crust. To the truck driver, it is the long exhale. The air down here is different. It is thicker, warmer, and smells less like ozone and more like river mud and honeysuckle. We have dropped over 1,000 feet in elevation, and the pressure changes enough to make your ears pop. Pop. That little internal click is the body's way of signing off on the journey. The first thing you notice is the silence of the tyres. During the descent, the tyres were singing a high-pitched song of stress, fighting the lateral forces of the curves and the friction of the pavement. Now, on the flat, straight run toward Chattanooga, they hum a low, contented baritone. You can finally relax your grip on the steering wheel. You flex your fingers, shaking out the numbness that has set in from 20 minutes of white knuckling. You reach for the thermos, which has been rattling in the cup holder, and take a sip. It's lukewarm, but it tastes like victory. Technically, this is a critical moment for the machine known as the cool-down phase. Just because the hill is over doesn't mean the danger is past. The metal components of the truck have been subjected to extreme thermal stress. If you were to pull over immediately and shut the truck off, you could cause catastrophic damage. The turbocharger is spinning at nearly 100,000 RPMs and is incredibly hot. It needs oil circulation to cool down gently. The brake drums, even if you use the jakes perfectly, have absorbed radiant heat from the road and the hubs. There is a phenomenon known as thermal shock. If a driver drags his brakes all the way down and then immediately splashes through a deep puddle at the bottom, the rapid cooling can actually crack the cast iron drums. Crack. It sounds like a gunshot. Even without water, the cooling process causes the metal to contract. If you listen closely when a truck parks at the bottom of the grade, you can hear it ticking and pinging, the sound of the beast settling its bones. Drivers are also watching for weeping wheel seals. The heat of the descent can thin the hub oil and pressurize the seals. If a seal fails now, it will spray oil all over the hot brakes, creating a mess and a potential fire hazard. So, even while cruising, the veteran driver is checking the mirrors, looking for that telltale streak of fluid on the tyres. The view out the windshield has transformed. The claustrophobic tunnel of trees and rock walls is gone. The horizon has cracked open. To our left, the dark mass of the plateau looms like a fortress wall we just escaped. To our right, the shimmer of Nickajack Lake reflects the moonlight. We are crossing the Tennessee River now, the bridge spanning a wide, placid body of water that feels miles away from the jagged violence of the cut. The water represents the flow of the valley, slow, powerful, inevitable. It is the opposite of the mountain. The radio chatter on Channel 19 shifts tone instantly. During the descent, the radio was a tool for survival. Terse warnings, location checks, silence. Now, it becomes a tool for community. The voices relax. Anyone know if the scale in Ringgold is open? Yeah, hand, the coop is lit up like a Christmas tree. How about that BBQ joint in Wildwood? They still open? The conversation turns to food, to fuel, to the mundane logistics of the job. The shared trauma of the descent binds the drivers together, but once it's over, they return to being individuals with distinct appetites and schedules. You might hear a driver say, "Well, that wasn't too bad tonight," and another reply, "Speak for yourself. I thought I smelled my linings cooking back at the runaway ramp." It's a form of debriefing, a way of laughing off the fear. I remember a specific run with a driver named Low Gear Larry. We hit the bottom of the grade, and the first thing he did was reach into his pocket, pull out a pack of gum, and unwrap a piece with trembling hands. "Every time," he whispered. "Every time I think I've mastered it, and every time I get the shakes at the bottom." Larry had 3 million miles under his belt. It taught me that respect for the mountain doesn't mean the absence of fear, it means the management of it. The day you stop respecting the grade is the day it bites you. We pass the exit for Kimball a la South Pittsburgh. There are truck stops here, massive sprawling cities of asphalt and diesel pumps. You see the trucks peeling off, their drivers desperate for a shower, a meal, or just a stationary bed. The lure of the lot lizard, a grim term for the darker side of truck stop life, and the comfort of the buffet line call to the weary. But we are pressing on. We have a timeline. We are riding the momentum of the descent, letting the kinetic energy carry us forward into the night. There is a sense of flow now. The traffic spreads out. The cars that were bunching up behind us on the hill zoom past, their taillights turning into red streaks. We are the steady heartbeat of the highway, holding our governed 65 miles per hour. The get-there-eaters fades, replaced by a steady rhythm. The miles click by, effortlessly. This is the runner's high of trucking. You feel like you could drive to Florida without stopping. The machine is working perfectly. The road is flat, and the night is yours. We look at the gauges one last time. The water temperature has dropped back to 180 degrees. The oil pressure is steady. The barometer, exhaust temp, has cooled. The truck has survived. It is a validation of the maintenance, the engineering, and the skill behind the wheel. We are a symbiotic pair, man and machine, having danced with gravity and walked away clean. As we cross into the Eastern time zone just past the Georgia line, the clock on the dash jumps forward an hour. We have literally lost time, but we have gained distance. The psychological weight of the mountain is behind us. We are no longer descending, we are running. And in the trucking world, running is what we live for. The wheels are turning, the money is earning, and the white line is the only boss we answer to. The graveyard of the Dixie Highway is a memory now, a story we will tell the rookies at the next counter. You think that hill in Pennsylvania is bad? Let me tell you about Monteagle. It becomes part of our lore, a stripe on our shoulder. But for tonight, the story is over. The road stretches out ahead, flat and welcoming, a ribbon of potential leading us to the next sunrise. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. No, wait, we're already at the end. The engine's roar has softened to a gentle rhythmic hum, a mechanical lullaby that vibrates softly through the seat. The white lines on the road are no longer frantic dashes, they are long, slow ribbons unspooling beneath us, guiding us toward rest. We have conquered the climb, survived the fog, and navigated the darkness. The mountain, with all its ghosts and gravity, is fading into the rearview mirror, just a dark silhouette against the starry sky. It will be there tomorrow, and the day after, waiting for the next convoy. But for us, the battle is done. The brakes are cool, the air is still, the heavy breathing of the engine is the only sound in the cab, a steady, reassuring presence that says, "I've got you." Take a deep breath. Let the tension drain from your shoulders. Unclench your hands from the wheel. You're safe on the valley floor. The lights of the towns pass by like slow-moving stars, warm and distant. You're part of the great quiet flow of the night, a traveller who has earned his rest. The logbook is closed. The miles are counted. Let the rhythm of the road rock you. The hum is a blanket. The dark is a comfort. You are heavy, you are warm, and you are home. Sweet dreams.